Sure.
With us having a quorum, so that we can begin, we'll work to get Mr. Stanford back.
Thank you.
All right, I hear voices on there. But I do not see the room that I saw before. I just see myself in the bottom right-hand corner.
Good morning. I would like to welcome you all to the Town of Hilton Head's Public Planning Committee meeting
We're good.
of August 4th, 2022. Krista, are we in compliance with FOIA?
Yes, sir, we are.
Thank you very much. Would you call the roll call?
Yes, sir. Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mrs. Becker? Here. Mr. Stanford? And Mr. Ames?
Here.
Thank you.
Mr. Stanford is obviously in a remote location, and we're trying to patch him in. I think he'll be able to join us in a minute or two. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Passes unanimously, or at least with the three present. Krista, do we have any request for public comment at this time?
No, sir, we did not have anyone sign up for public comment. I did provide the committee with some written comments yesterday at close of business.
Yes, we did receive those. Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the consideration of a resolution authorizing the town manager to enter into contractual arrangements for beach parking management services. It says in our summary, the Public Planning Committee should recommend to the town council that the town manager be authorized to enter into contractual negotiations with Pci Municipal Services to provide beach parking operations, management, and enforcement services within an agreed-upon scope of services authorized by the town council. Mr. Gruber.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm excited to be here with you this morning. As you know, this has been an ongoing process for some time. Just to give a little bit of background history, several years ago, Town Council instructed staff to undertake the process of developing a comprehensive plan to manage our beach parking services. As a result of that, we engaged the firm of Walker & Associates, who prepared a very comprehensive and detailed report for us, outlining a list of recommendations and steps that we should take in terms of improving our overall service for beach parking, considering imposing fees for charging of beach parking, and looking at a number of technology and infrastructure improvements. In process, we met back with the committee. At that time, we were instructed to do two things. One, engage in more public outreach and feedback, which we have done. We have taken all of those comments and we've incorporated them into our decision-making matrices. And two, we were asked to issue a request for qualifications to identify the best suited firm to work with us and the Hilton Head Island community to develop a comprehensive beach parking program. And so I'm pleased to bring forward today the firm that staff has selected for that purpose, which is Pci Municipal Services. The principal is here today of the firm, and I'm going to turn a presentation over to him in just a minute, but wanted to talk about some of the reasons why we are so excited to bring this firm forward. Pci Municipal Services focuses exactly on that, providing parking management to municipalities. And they approach each situation with an understanding that every jurisdiction is unique. And so we might try to compare ourselves to many other places. At the end of the day, Hilton Head Island is Hilton Head Island. And so we need a plan that is going to be tailored to fit all of our new unique needs, down to the level of each individual parking area. And so that is what they have done. They've worked with staff over the last several months to review each of our beach parking areas, to talk about what we need in terms of infrastructure, what we need in terms of technology, what we need in terms of management, and what we need in terms of enforcement. And so the goal today is to bring them forward, let them talk with you about what their proposed scope of services are going to look like, discuss with you, and ultimately, if there's support, to move that forward to council, discuss with council. And once that scope of services is finalized, we will use that as the foundation for a contractual agreement that we administratively will work on executing after the agreed upon scope of service has been finalized with town council. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jack and let him take it from there. Thank you.
Morning, Jack, and welcome to Hilton Head Island.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. Put together a little presentation today, meant to be a guideline for a conversation. So feel free to jump in and ask questions at any time. I'm totally welcome those. Let's see if we can get this thing moving. Here we go. All right, so today we wanted to cover a few things. First of all, we wanted to introduce our firm and give you the opportunity to ask any questions about who we are and what we do. Also talk about the custom program approach we put together for Hilton Head. Now keep in mind, we view ourselves as a consultant, and programs change over time. I've been doing this for 30 years, and things evolve. People in your seats may change. You guys may win the lottery or decide to do something else, right? So we have to evolve. So we try and build a program that can adapt and change over time. Things like autonomous vehicles that are coming sometime in the future. We want to be prepared for that and help our clients prepare for that. And that aligns with the technology that we put together to address your immediate concerns, but also what about the future? How are we going to deal with things going forward? EV vehicles are coming really fast. How are we going to deal with those? Then we put together a few operating details for specific locations that staff and we have discussed that I think will be top priority. Talk about the transition, very critical to get off on the good start with the community, the local businesses, and make sure we're aligned and communicating properly on everything. And then, of course, open up some time for discussion and questions. So a little bit about our firm. Josh said we are a municipal parking company only. The two good-looking gentlemen on the outside of me up there are my partners in the business. And together we have over 100 years. I think the picture of Gil on the BT, I guess on the left side, is more recent than the ones in the middle, as you can tell. But our focus is really on quality. We want to only work with communities that want to have a quality program, that want to invest in it and run it well. And to do that, we've got to put our people first. I always tell our folks, we have a couple hundred employees now, it's them that matter. The folks that are out there in the parking lots, cleaning, talking to customers, collecting payments, fixing machines, picking up trash. They're really the company. So we've got to put them at the forefront because they're going to be the ones dealing with the community, your visitors and your residents here. So we've got to figure out a way to treat them well, align them with everyone's interest, and make sure they understand what the focus is. And that comes from y'all down to the staff. In order to do this in a high level, we have a commitment where we'll have one regional manager dedicated to each 5 of our clients. You're probably not aware of this, but that's unheard of in our industry. Usually those sort of positions would oversee hundreds of locations, which doesn't give them adequate time to get involved, stay involved, support, be available. We answer our phones. And one of the great things about working with us, you can call Brian, myself, or Gil at any given time. We'll answer the phone and we'll get answers for you. We have extensive experience opening up municipal operations. Been doing this for 30 years. I've worked with hundreds of municipalities all over North and South America. I've started up programs from scratch. I've transitioned them from public to private. I've got a lot of, experience in that area. And then aligning right-sized technology. It's so critical today that we do the right thing. And I'll get into that in great detail a little bit later. What is the right technology for your community and your parking program? Just a brief view here. Some of our municipal clients, you can see that some of them have been with the company for quite some time. You also see that we've added quite a few recently. In fact, you can add Chattanooga to that list. We are opening that operation on November 1st. Oklahoma City is actually opening today, so I'm catching a flight out there tonight to join my colleagues out there for that transition. But we're growing quickly because our message is resonating with municipalities. They don't want a commoditized service. They want personal attention from high-level people that know what they're talking about, in essence. So as Josh said, we view every operation, every client as a custom, a boutique. How are we going to identify the specific needs so that the program can be successful for each community? And it's very cool because when we looked at your website and the core values that you posted out to your community align very well with what we like to do and what we want to do here with you. Pursuit of excellence, state of art. I think In all reality, if the plan that we propose goes forward, you'll have one of the most sophisticated parking programs in the country. You'll have data that is very transparent, very open. There's accountability at all levels. It's going to be very cool to be a part of. Understanding a startup. This is a big transition. You already have a paid parking program. You already have a permit program. What we're doing is we're moving that forward where it's more convenient, more efficient, and allows you to have the information you need to make good decisions going forward. You have to brand the program. I always believe in that. Park HH is a suggestion that we have. There has to be a name associated with the service. And we necessarily don't want to limit this just to parking because it's really parking and transportation. How are we getting people to parking lots? How are we aligning with the trolley service that you already offer? We need to communicate efficiently across the whole board of transportation. Specifically for your community, we understand that the residential parking program is key. We've got a great idea for how to make that more efficient, convenient for the citizens, more controlled, make sure they have access to the spaces that you've committed to them. Addressing the tourists and visitors need. How do we make it a welcoming parking program that's easy for them to use, easy to find parking spaces? And then the challenge that's happening all over our country. How do we deal with short-term rentals? It's a big change. Much like Uber and Lyft affected airports, VRBO and Airbnb have affected communities like yours. So I said these words already, but easy and convenient is super important. We don't want to encumber people, confuse them, frustrate them in the process of parking. So what we have proposed is what we say is a frictionless parking program, where they can park their car and get out and not have to necessarily stop at a machine or talk to anybody. They can pay for their parking quickly and be on their way. We have to understand your customers. As I already mentioned, the key groups that we have to address here are the residents and the tourists, and then also the folks that come via short-term rentals. So one of the core technologies that we have proposed is a mobile payment solution. So this would be the primary way that the visitors to the community would pay for their parking. And if you'd like, can I approach up there? All right. If you'd like, these are actually active accounts. And so the way that people will be able to pay is they'll either text HHCB to that number up there, and that's designated for the Coligny parking lot. That's how we've set that up. But each lot could have its own code. The other option is much simpler. You just scan that QR code at the bottom of the sign here, and it will initiate the payment transaction.
Jack, is this dimension what would be in the field? Is that why you're handing it out to us?
This is just an example, and you can actually go ahead and scan that, and if anyone wants to experience that process, just one.
How is a car entering a parking lot going to get this information?
So typically what happens is the signs we placed around the parking lot.
Is this the sign that you place around the parking lot?
This could be one.
I mean, that's the dimension. I'm just trying to get an
Sure.
idea of it. Okay.
We'll work with staff on the final layout for the signs and get approval. This was just a preliminary draft of the sign, yes, sir.
I was curious.
So once the customer is paid for parking, if they've already used the system, the next time they come in and enter their cell phone, they're already going to be in the system. So it's very convenient. You can pay for your parking in a matter of seconds. This can be set up at variable rate codes, whatever staff is approved on the rates. So you can have each hour, whatever, each day, whatever parameter you want. It also gives you the capability of buying a full day of parking. And if it's decided, you can also have it where I could purchase parking in one area, but it would allow me to park in multiple areas. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in how you use the technology. Now, the key to all of these systems is that we're using virtual permitting. And what I mean by that is we're not using tickets or hang tags or anything like that. We're using the license plate of the vehicle as a credential, the matter of record. So we'll know, based on the license plates of the vehicles parked in the lot, who's paid, who's a permit holder. And so it allows for very controlled and accurate management of the system. With the text-to-park solution, we also have validation capability. And I think that's going to be key for the community, and some of the businesses may choose to validate for their customers' parking. Okay, and that'll be very simple. Another sign that can be placed inside the businesses or here in staff, wherever you want to put signs like this, it can be assigned a validation account. And again, they will simply come in, scan the QR code on the sign, and they'll be able to validate that parking. And that could be managed in a couple of different ways. One, it could be discounted parking. Some of the clients that we work with allow businesses to discount the parking rate as a way to encourage interaction. And it also could be a total validation, and that would be charged back to the business where they could pay for all of the parking that they validated. So a lot of flexibility, a lot of options in doing that. On the residential parking program, like most communities of your size, the use of hang tags and stickers has been the method in the past. Again, our goal is to simplify the process, get rid of the cost and the administration of those stickers and hang tags, and move more towards virtual permitting, using the resident's license plate as the matter of record. And each resident can enter multiple license plates in the system. So there's flexibility on that part. What we've recommended is a product called ParkLink that allows for the customer to be able to update their information without having to interact with anyone. So if I buy a new vehicle, I can go into the system myself and update the information in there. So the process could also be administered online instead of having to come to an office or mail in anything. They could literally go online, sign up for a permit. There's ways within the system to prove that they're a resident. We approve the permit, and it can all be done virtually in a matter of seconds online, including the collection of any payments that are due for those permits. The system would also allow for people, if their nephew or sister is coming into town, they would be able to use this system to register whatever visitor permits that y'all have approved for the program. Again, the goal here is to use the license plate as a credential, which allows us to effectively monitor all of that permit use in the facilities. And we'll actually know which residents are using parking in certain lots, how often are they using it. All of that data will be available to you as you go forward making decisions. The other piece with the residential parking program, and I'll get to it on the next slide, is we propose a technology to protect the resident spaces for the residents. And this can be done with a sensor. So a simple sensor put in each parking space will allow us to know that that space is currently being used, and we can also identify who's using that space. So if someone that doesn't have a residential permit pulls into one of those spaces, we'll also be alerted of that, and we'll be able to deal with that promptly. On the sensors, here's what they look like, the little black dot up there. Those will be mounted into the asphalt. And as I said, they'll be able to tell us in real time if a car is present or not in that space. So we'll be able to have real-time occupancy and availability of parking. So any of the residents that are thinking of going to Islanders or whichever lot they're going to, they'll be able to go on and check to see if there's actually available spaces in that lot when they're headed there. If there's not, maybe they delay their trip or they go somewhere else and park for that day. The way we identify which vehicle is parked in that space can be accomplished through Bluetooth. Most everyone has a cell phone today, which has Bluetooth capability. So the residents would literally be able to pull into the space, and through an app, they'll be able to check in for the parking and register that they're the person using that space. So the other option for those that don't want to have a cell phone or don't have a cell phone would be to give them a Bluetooth tag. And that would automatically be recognized by that sensor. So the tag would be in their car, they pull over the sensor, and the system would automatically recognize that Jack was parked in that spot. So the other feature that is available here is through this technology, we would be able to set up reservations. So if you wanted to allow people to reserve a space, the system would know that space 17 was reserved for Jack, and only Jack could park there. So all of those things are capable with this technology. We're trying to offer a lot of flexibility here. On the enforcement side, we're proposing a camera-based system. And the cameras would be a combination of mobile cameras that would be mounted on a vehicle. And as the vehicles patrol the lots, they would be capturing these license plates and doing a comparison of cars parked versus cars that have paid via text to park, or they have a permit in that lot, or it may be a registered vehicle, a police car, whatever the case may be. And from that system, we'll be able to tell cars that are parked without a payment or they shouldn't be in the lot. And all of that can be managed in real time, so we can be very accurate in the approach we take. For the larger lots, we've suggested stationary cameras. And these cameras would be capturing cars as they come and go from the lot and doing the same process I just described for enforcement, identifying people that don't have a permit or haven't paid in the lot. The other thing the stationary cameras will provide is real-time occupancy in each facility. So on the larger lots where you have a couple hundred, 300 or 400 spaces, you'll be able to tell at any given time how many cars are using that parking lot, provide availability of spaces to the public. For folks that are parked without payment, you have a number of options on enforcement. Our suggestion, especially when the program is new, is to issue payment reminders or warnings to folks that haven't paid yet. Give them another opportunity to go into the system and make payment. We typically suggest that there's no fine associated with that process. The goal of enforcement is really compliance. Let's get everyone to follow the rules, and that way we'll all sing Kumbaya at the end of the day. But to make that happen, there has to be some teeth in the equation for folks that refuse to pay or follow the rules, where they will be issued a fine for offenses. And that can be totally controlled by the policies that you pass. We can make recommendations based on what other communities are doing on this front. If someone does get a ticket, they will be able to go online and pay that ticket. They can do that from their cell phone, or they can come to an office, which we will have here locally, and make that payment or mail it in. Try and make it as convenient for everyone as we possibly can. So here's the high-tech piece of it. There's a lot of technology that I just laid out here, and it's all resides on different systems. The central system is called Verge, and Verge will be able to pull in all of that data in real time into one platform. And from that, we'll be able to provide dashboards to all of staff and the council, and it can provide real-time utilization of your parking lot. It'll tell you how many cars are parked, how long they're parked, how many unique vehicles are parked. It could even tell you how many out of state, where they're from. All of that information could be available to you. And that is a great baseline for making policy. Do we need more parking is a typical question, right? We'll also be able to centralize all this data to tell the public where they can find parking at any given time. The system will also minimize the administrative process and create better control. Very limited cash handling here. Almost all payments are going to be made online through credit cards. So all of that will be very transparent. There really won't be a need for high-level auditing of parking revenues. So it'll give you a great comfort level on that front. And all of this data can be pushed to the public through a mobile app. Spot Parking is one that we recommend. This is a wayfinding app. So anyone coming down here, a resident, can use this app to find available parking at any given time. And they can pick all of the available lots that have parking. And from the app, they'll also be able to click through and get directions to that parking lot, and also click through to make payment for their parking and see all the different payment options there. One of the goals that was put forth by Walker was to mitigate some of the traffic and folks wandering around trying to find parking when everything's full. And this app is a great tool for doing that. We're trying to mitigate the amount of traffic, which of course equates to pollution. And the less traffic we have, the more safe it is. As I drive through the community, I'm always cognizant of all the bikes coming around. You got to have your eyes out all different directions here to be safe. There is also an option to push this information to signage. It could be signage at the lot that would show available occupancy when they pull in if they haven't used the app. Or it could also be put for wayfinding on the streets if that's something that the town wanted to consider. So the goal here is to enhance the customer experience, get the people to the parking lot as quickly as possible, know that they'll find a space when they get there, and be able to make their payment through one process. Okay, any questions before I go through some of the specific locations that we...
Jack, I interrupted your flow and asked a specific question. In the interim, I have to remind myself that here we're simply authorizing the town manager to get into the contractual negotiations, and we're not here to try to design or respond to the specifics of your presentation. So let's continue to move forward.
Although without some of that information, right, we don't know whether or not it's a yes or no to move forward. So I think some of that discussion might be appropriate. And I'm not trying to step on anyone's toes, but I think there are questions in my mind that I'd like to get responses to, or at least express.
Right?
When it's appropriate. Chair, I'm sorry if I've overstepped. But.
Please, Jack.
Go ahead. All right. So again, going through some of the key locations, Alder Lane is popular Islander parking. Currently, there is 23 parking spaces there with meters. And the plan here would be to remove those meters, reduce the physical clutter on the lots and the cost of the operation. And here, like many of the lots, we would use the text to park as the primary payment for paying for daily parking. We could also, through the ParkLink system, offer permits for this lot. They could be designated for the lot or designated general permits where they could park in this lot. This is one of the smaller ones, so ones that we would suggest using the mobile LPR for control and monitoring of the lot and enforcement. Burke's Beach has a lot of parking spaces for your community. And as everyone is aware, we have the youth sports, which uses those lots quite a bit. And so we've talked about that in detail with staff. We know that the sports seasons typically end before the peak tourist season comes to the island. But we do want to be cognizant and make sure that we're not disrupting the families that are using the park for the sports activities. So we could do a permitting program tied in with the registration of those programs that would allow people to register their vehicles. So we would make it hassle-free when they do park into the lot. As a form of payment, again, we would use the text-to-park process for payment there. Now, this is one of the larger facilities, so we would recommend using stationary LPR. We'd mount those cameras at the entrances and exits of the parking area. Again, that would give us complete occupancy, how many spaces are available, all that information, and we'd be able to do the directed enforcement because we would know when people are parked there that haven't paid or have a permit. And just if I didn't say it before, how we do the text-to-park on the stationary lots is if a customer pulls into the lot, they're recognized, they're put in inventory, that plate is, and we give them a grace period to make payment. So that can be adjusted at any given time. Typically, we do 15 to 30 minutes there before they make payment. Folly Beach has 54 parking spaces. And again, the process here would be to remove the existing parking meters from that location. And we would use text-to-park as the means for collecting the daily parking there. Fish Hall, 48 spaces. And this, talking with staff, this is one of the lots that we thought could be designated for free parking. For those folks that chose to park there and not pay, that would be an option. We've also talked about using a gate system to control that lot after hours. So what that would do is at a certain time, the gates would automatically close so people couldn't come into the parking lot. But if they're already in the lot, they would be able to exit. The gate would automatically open when they pulled up to it. So it would help solve some of the control problems and security problems, keep people from parking there after the park's been closed. Dreesen Beach, 206 parking spaces. On this lot, you currently have 28 resident parking spaces designated. Our recommendation would put those sensors in those spaces, again, so we could protect those spaces for their designated use of allowing only residents to park there. The other opportunity here is there is shuttle parking spaces in the lot, and a lot of shuttles drop off groups here. So we need to find a way to control and accommodate those shuttles. That could be set up separately, whether it's decided to be paid or permitted. Those shuttles would have to register and make payment. And then there's 3 designated shuttle spaces there. That may be spaces where we put those sensors in to protect them. We don't want a shuttle to pull up there and not have a proper spot to park in, and that ends up causing trouble there. So we could accommodate the shuttle parking through the same process, whether it be permits or text to park, to use that lot. Islanders Beach. I drove in there this morning and was greeted by town staff asking if I had a permit, and of course I said no. We can eliminate the need to do that by using the technology that we proposed. Here we are at 159 spaces, and the recommendation is that we do sensors there that are for residents only. And this would provide, as I said before, complete transparency on how the lot's being used, how often people are using the lot, how many available spaces at any given time for the wayfinding purposes.
This is an opportunity. I'd like to ask a direct question because Islanders Beach has been such a problem. So while I have other questions that I'm looking forward to hearing about, Islanders Beach in particular, when you approached this morning, you asked, do you have a permit? And this program would allow us, as you said, to remove that person from asking that question. However, if someone doesn't have a permit and they go in and they park, granted, your sensor will pick that up. What is the time frame before that person without a permit who's now parked gets removed?
Well, our staff would be alerted immediately if someone was parked there illegally. And so then we have the option of enforcement. What is the process we want to go through? Are we going to issue a citation to them? Are we going to have them booted or towed? I personally prefer booting. There's some self-releasing boot technology out there that doesn't remove them from that space, so there's kind of pros and cons. Towing would get the car out of there. Booting, I think, would get the message across that you shouldn't be here, and hopefully that'll never happen again. So we have a number of options on how to deal with that.
Right, so as I understand it, that makes sense on some level, but understanding our islanders, our residents' need for those spaces and that those are limited to begin with, any time delay, or someone who's a resident, permitted resident, looking for a spot, and I know we're not debating the ins and outs of this now.
Sure.
But this is a particularly sensitive area. So a different plan, in my mind, already would be necessary for specifically Islanders Beach. So we may not necessarily always be able to remove that immediate inquiry. And that's just in protection of what we've tried to do for our residents. So thank you for clarifying a little bit of that for me and allowing me to make sure that we are doing just that, looking out for our residents.
Yeah, and absolutely. And let me say again that we're here to work with the town, and if it requires running the same way it is today, we're totally fine with that. So if we need to have staff there, we can do that. Okay, Coligny Beach Park, the largest one, 512 spaces, and we understand that this is, there's a lot of retail components around the area, different businesses, and so one of the things that we've talked about here is perhaps offering 1 hour of free parking in this lot. The system would be controlled through the stationary cameras at the entrance. So basically, we would give everyone a 1 hour grace period. Now, if they knew they were going to the beach and they were going to be much longer than that, they would obviously be able to go ahead and pay. But the people with that 1 hour grace period, if they were running into one of the retail shops or just going to the park for 45 minutes, whatever the case would be, they would be accommodated without having to pay under that scenario. The other thing that we need to be cognizant of is the employee parking for the area. Getting employees today is very hard. We don't want to complicate that issue any further by making parking a challenge for them. What we've done with a lot of our municipal clients for the retail and hospitality employees is that we have a special program for them, a typical discounted program, and we designate areas for their parking to make sure that we can accommodate them, that we're not disrupting the businesses. So that is also something we can work with staff on to come up with something that accommodates the needs. The other challenge here is when you have paid parking next to free parking, some people will, we call bleed over. They will bleed over into the free areas. So we understand that that can cause a challenge for the businesses, but it already is a challenge. As I pulled in and had my coffee this morning, right across from the parking area, there were signs everywhere that says retail parking only, restaurant retail parking only, no beach parking, right? So that's a challenge that we can work together with the businesses and the landowners in the area to come up with a system that makes sense. Again, I think everyone's goal is to offer the visitors and the residents here a consistent approach to parking. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to work with those businesses to come up with a program that makes sense on their property as well as ours, as well as the town's. And then obviously we have to accommodate the events, some of the big events in the town, Wing Fest and Oyster Fest and the various concerts that are held there. All of that will have to be managed within the program, whether it's paid or unpaid. That can all be managed through the technology that we put forth. And one of the things we've discussed here is gate controls. So after hours, we would be able to block access to the lots. Again, allowing people that are already in the lot after hours to free flow out without interruption. Okay. So our approach is obviously requires a good on-site team. And we are fortunate enough to present Matt Trular. He's anxiously awaiting the opportunity to move to Hilton. Matt has over 10 years of experience working with the municipalities. I personally have supervised Matt in a number of operations, some very, very large ones. One of them that 48,000 spaces. So he's got a lot of experience. He's got great personality. I think he'll work very well with staff and be a great asset to the town managing the program if we go forward. Matt would have an assistant manager supporting him. Typically what we do there is we have them split the time, so we have a manager on duty during all of the parking hours. In support of them, the staff will be doing maintenance on the lot, picking up trash, doing those sort of things. Also dealing with any cameras that need to be adjusted, signage out there. They'll be working to make sure any graffiti or stickers or anything like that is dealt with quickly. On the enforcement side, the good thing is that we're able to operate this program very efficiently with the technology we put forward. So that doesn't require a great deal of staff. One mobile enforcement officer, primary officer, would be able to cover all of the properties, and they would be issuing citations and such. They would be supported by the rest of the staff, so they're not exclusive. The manager and the assistant manager would step in and be cross-trained on doing all of that activity as well. The ambassadors. So during the events, during peak season, we will have additional staff that we'll bring in to help direct traffic, to assist people, answer questions. They'll be placed strategically based on utilizations and the time of the week. And again, the goal here is to be positive, to help with parking, to be familiar with all of the town's policies. All of the words that come out of our mouth should be pre-approved. So we can effectively communicate consistently between the town staff and our team out in the field. And we would have a local office, of course, where these folks would be based out of, and we would have the ability for people to come to the office if they need assistance. Customer service is huge. Having Matt in charge here will be a wonderful asset. All of our staff goes through ambassador training, how to interact with the public. Parking, we typically don't get a lot of compliments, but we work really hard to try and get them. When we are doing enforcement, that can be somewhat challenging, so all of our enforcement people go through special training on how to interact with folks and answer questions and diffuse the situation. We also want the public feedback, ongoing. We want to have surveys. We want to get, open forum. Come in, tell us how we're doing. How can we do better? How can we learn? The great thing about the Verge system, having all of that data available to you, we can surface all of that information along with statistics. Are we getting more negative feedback when we're fuller? Of course, that typically falls in line. Are people happy with paying? I've never found anyone that was, but those are things that we can surface in the data for you to assess how the process is working. One of the great things about the Text to Park program is that we are able to offer a survey after every transaction. So every customer there can give us their feedback on how things are going. The cool thing about that, typically surveys get about a 1% to 2% response. Using this technology, we're actually getting 16 to 17% response. So we're getting more engagement from the community, getting more feedback. And then on top of that, we will have a 24/7 call center that will be able to field calls at 2 a.m. or 2 p.m., whatever time of the day. If our manager is not able to answer, someone will answer the phone and help them with whatever's going on. The last thing we want to do is delay the family getting the kids out onto the sand because of a parking issue. So we'll be there to help them through that process. So critical here is the program startup. And as I mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of experience in working with towns and cities on this process. What I always suggest is that we make sure that we have a unified message. What is the program intended to do? What is it accomplishing? How is it going to work? We have to work with the town to make sure that information is readily available. Initially, we like to do open houses, invite the community in, invite the businesses in, invite the citizens in, ask questions, touch the technology, be explained on how the permitting system works, the enforcement works, get that sort of engagement. Also to offer press releases, working with the local press to get that information out there correctly. I found, and you guys can probably echo in here, if you don't get ahead of that communication, people start thinking the worst. They start thinking Philadelphia parking wars is coming to the town. And we definitely don't want that, so messaging is critical. Offering digital platforms, like having a designated parking website that has all of the question and answer information on there. Feeding information to social media, upcoming events, if there's construction in one of the lots or something like that, right, we want to be able to communicate that out quickly to the public. And then on the technology deployment, educating the public. Have a period of phasing that in where people are getting to experience it and get an opportunity if they don't pay, like I said before, payment reminders work really well to educate the process. And then over time, I'm sure that the staff and you folks will want to modify policy to accommodate what you're seeing, what you're hearing from the community. And again, that's what we're here to do. We're here to be a consultant over time. And if we need to change something or you want a recommendation on how you can deal with some of the feedback you're getting, we're here to offer that suggestion. And then after transition, the big value I think we offer is we want to be actively engaged. We want to be a partner of the town. We want to be available. We want to develop a business plan that we're working towards. What is the goal of the parking program? How are we doing financially? We want to make sure that that is all laid out where we have a target and our people have a target to achieve. And then let's agree on KPIs. Let's talk about what we expect from the program. How are we performing? How are we going to monitor that? They say if you're not measuring it, you're not controlling it, and you're not monitoring, right? So let's figure out a way we're going to measure things, the customer experience, the compliance, all of those things, and we'll give you that data. And we'll wrap that up in quarterly reports that can be available to the public and council. And then, as I said multiple times, we're here to be an ongoing consultant for the town and staff. The timeline that we discussed is with approval, hopefully get a contract executed in October of this year. And from there, we can be in position to launch the residential parking program in December. We can get the new system out there and work with the citizens on that. The technology implementation would occur in March or April, which would position us for a soft program launch in April of next year, and then be ready with a full program launch on Memorial Day of next year. And that concludes our presentation, and I welcome any questions that you have.
Jack, thank you. Josh, I do have a question. Does our recommendation, our vote, go to full council?
Yes, sir. It is a recommendation on the scope of the services that are being offered.
And then secondly, It's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that the program at this point has not been designed, but that council will be involved in its design over time with recommendations coming forth from the staff?
Yes, sir, you're exactly right. The logical process that we kind of have lined up is once we've identified the scope of services to be provided in terms of infrastructure, technology, and management, that'll drive the contract price that we will then enter into. Once we have a contract price, then we can talk about, based upon the feedback we heard from council, that they don't want to use ad valorem taxes from residents to pay for this parking program, we can craft a pricing program for the parking that will at least pay for the operational costs of the program itself. And then if we want to talk about cost plus investment or reinvestment in the program, we have that opportunity, but we at least have a baseline that we can work from in terms of targeting what it is that we want to do in terms of generating parking revenue.
Okay, thank you. Krista isn't here, but do we have Glenn on the line? Has Glenn?
I believe he is on the line, and Krista had to step out to do her official duties. And I'm going to throw Karen.
I'll ask Glenn to make comments if he's on the line at this time. Glenn?
I was going to say, from a technology standpoint, we may have to flip back over to him, which is why.
All right, then I'm just going to ask Alex to go ahead.
Yep, bear with us for just 1 second, and we'll get him.
Alex?
Jack, welcome, and thank you for such a thorough presentation, and I'm impressed with the capabilities of you and your team. I don't really have any questions for you. They're more so comments for staff as they start to engage into these contract agreements. But I will say that the fact that you started with our core values in mind, that really impressed me, okay? We spent a lot of time working on our comprehensive plan, which is guiding us into the future, and the values that you have chosen to incorporate into your work is just beautiful, okay? So I want to thank you for that, all right?
Thank you.
I guess, is somebody taking notes, Josh? Because I want to roll off a few things and I'm done, okay? I don't have questions necessarily, except for with this plan being so comprehensive and such enhancement in technology, I think you answered some of this, Josh, but the ability for us to make money is going to be a question that's going to come up, absolutely, right? And with that being said, Jack mentioned early on that there has to be a connector between his services and public transportation. And I don't want those two to be competing, because at this point, we've got X amount of parking spaces, which means X amount of dollars. And the more that we force people to take public transportation, the demand on the parking spaces may go down, which may mean less revenue somewhere, okay? Those two cannot compete. They have to work together in our long-term plan. On the topic of fees, the use of some of the parks for recreation programs, I know that there's a way to do that through the registration, but I want to make sure that that stays free. Our families are already spent in a lot of ways, so I want to have an additional burden when it comes to that. The startup program, again, has to coordinate not just with public transportation, but I think the chamber also needs to be a big player in this, because they control our messaging to the 3 million plus visitors that we're seeing every year. I think this will become a part of our brand if we do it well. And the only other thing is Jack mentioned that they're looking to be a partner. So as we receive information either on a quarterly or semi-annual basis, I think that should come directly from Jack's team versus a staff report, because the ability to grab data that he is suggesting is going to help us along the way with making policy down the road. So that partnership, I think, should be really concrete within the agreement, okay? Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Glenn on the line at this point? Glenn, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, excellent. Glenn, welcome.
Good.
Do you have questions
Thank
or
you.
comments?
Thank you. It's nice to be here up in the mountains watching you all working down in the low country. Jack, I really appreciate your very thorough report. I would like to see a copy of your PowerPoint, if you can share that, because I didn't see any of it where I am now, and it would be useful for me to have that. I am excited about the opportunity to see some real practical use of our parking facilities here on the island, and you make a very compelling case that you can do exactly that. I'm wondering if there is a facility, a community not too far away that you have set up these systems where on a voluntary basis we could go down and just see how they actually work. Is there a location you could think of that we could visit?
There's a number of beach parking operations that have some components of what we proposed. We do not currently manage any of those operations. I've been involved with them. Most of them use meters technology as their primary way of payment, leveraged out with mobile payment solutions. So I don't know if I could give you a great comparable within driving distance, no.
Okay, it would be really useful to, if you can't find one nearby, if you could identify some communities around the country that have adopted the more full system, and then we can reach out to those communities and get their responses. So you can get back with Josh on that. That would be very useful. Our problem here is that we are a very popular vacation community, which is obvious, and we have very limited parking facilities. It seems to me that the type of program you are recommending will help us manage that better to cut down on frustration that people might have with parking. In the Coligny area, obviously, is the major draw because of the beach, the park, and Coligny Plaza itself. It's going to be very interesting to me to see how your management ideas work here for the benefit of tourists, primarily for the benefit of residents, but also for the convenience of employees, staff people that work down there. You touched on that, and I look forward to seeing how that actually works, because there's a lot of friction down there, and it's primarily because we don't have enough parking in that area. One point that you did not touch on that I'm interested in, and that is, can we charge different rates depending on where you're coming from? You talked about we could do resident-free parking, for example, but what I'm thinking is that there's a certain rate for a resident of Beaufort County who is not a resident of Hilton Head Island versus a rate that would be charged for someone who is outside of Beaufort County or outside of South Carolina.
Yes, sir. The technology would allow you to have different rate structures based on residency or where their vehicle is from, however you want to go about that. I've worked with other cities that, for example, have offered senior citizens a discounted rate, or veterans
Yes.
would be given a discounted rate. So there are ways to accommodate different rate structures.
Okay, I think that'll be very useful to us in managing it, because we don't want to penalize the local people, but we have a day tripper problem here because we do have such a wonderful beach, and frankly, because we have free parking, at least until apparently next spring. And so I look forward to working with you and the town staff and the town manager in bringing this program forward. Thank you for a very thorough presentation. Those are my comments, David.
Thank you, Glenn.
Ms. Becker.
Thank you, David. Welcome. So I have a number of things that I want to touch on. In your and I, like Glenn, am looking forward to getting the PowerPoint to more carefully take my time walking through it and remembering your comments along the way. I don't believe in, excuse me, I don't believe I picked up in your presentation where you referred to the last of what you presented as the town needs. We talked about residential, we talked about tourism. I didn't hear the piece about short-term rentals and how that would play into this. So I'd be interested in a little bit more information about that. But I think my biggest question, or my biggest concern, I have lots of questions, and I realize, David, yes, a lot of this would be the pulling together the details and the refining of how the program works across the island. My biggest concern right now is the collection of all that data, all of those specifics and how they relate and they track people across and who they are. Where is that data kept and what's done with it once it's collected?
Well, first off, let me say that the data will be yours, only used by the town for purposes that you decide. The data, I always recommend that you have anonymize the data. And that you also have a point where you eliminate license plate reads. Most of the communities I've worked in have adopted that approach. So the data would be yours. It would all be centralized within the Verge platform, but we could store the data wherever you wanted to. It could be on a town server, or you could be on your cloud-hosted site, whatever you decide to do. But the key is it'll be your data, and you can use it how you want to.
So generally speaking, regardless of who it belongs to, I'm uncomfortable with the collection of that type of specific data and tracking. So that's my concern, my greatest concern. And I don't think that I could really endorse a program that collects that data. So if there are other ways of doing it, I'd be interested in hearing that. But that's a privacy issue and not one that I'm comfortable with. I'm also interested in knowing, I think you mentioned a staff, a manager who you have already identified who's looking forward to moving to Hilton Head, and we certainly would welcome him here. His name, I believe, was Matt. Where would the other staff come from? Is it local hires?
Yes, ideally we'll hire everyone local.
Okay. And what would you imagine that force, that staff team looking like in terms of number?
We would have, well, during the peak period, we would have additional staff, the ambassadors that would be brought in. But the core staff is really going to be 4 people.
Oh, 4 people.
Yeah.
Okay. And so so that staff at some point would be in a vehicle with a camera on top and roaming through the parking lots, picking up the data, collecting the data, and then processing it in terms of who would get a warning, hey, your time is almost up, et cetera. How does that work if someone, how does that work? If someone is sitting on the beach, they've come to, let's use this as an example, and this may not be the best one, but they've gone to Coligny to park, they've gotten their grace hour to go do their shopping, and I think that's a great idea, frankly. But they've then decided to sit down and lunch, and then they've decided to walk on the beach, and they've not paid attention to their phone, and they now have extended their time to 3 or 4 hours down. Where does that piece of information get picked up? Does that get picked up from the roaming vehicle that happens to pick it up? Or how does that get analyzed? This is above my program. Everyone who knows me knows technology is not my thing. So if my questions seem a bit simplistic,
No.
I'm starting from that level.
No,
and
good
I
question.
appreciate the information.
Good question. So
Okay.
for the folks that have paid, let's say they paid for an hour and thinking they were going to be an hour, but they end up staying beyond that. If they use the text-to-park system, it will text them and let them know that your session's about to expire and give them the opportunity to extend their time.
So even if they're going in for their 1 hour grace period, they still text to say, I'm in this space, and register their car?
Correct.
So everyone who pulls in, regardless, okay.
Correct.
All right.
The other thing I'd like to point out
Sure.
too,
Thank you.
because the text-to-park connects us to the customer. In most parking operations where you have a gate and you pull a ticket, they have no idea who you are. One of the values of text-to-park is we would have the opportunity to communicate back to the customer if there was an issue. If they left their beach bag on top of their car or their window was down, our officers would be able, through the system, to check if we have a cell phone number to reach out to them and say, hey, we've noticed this, just want to make you aware of that. So there's additional communication with the community. The same is true on violations. If you'd like us to, we can communicate out to folks and just say, hey, we haven't gotten a payment yet. Would you please do so? And then the other thing I wanted to touch on, so again, the goal of enforcement is compliance, getting people to understand the rules and follow the rules. So there's a difference in my mind for someone that pulls in and doesn't pay, and maybe they've got 5 parking tickets already they haven't paid. I always like to say we need to treat them differently. We need to do something else to change their behavior. The folks that paid for 2 hours but happened to stay overtime, I would treat them differently. I would have a much softer recommendation for how you deal with that situation. Again, the goal isn't to write a bunch of parking tickets and have that as a friction point. We're just trying to educate and interact with the community. Unlike most cities, one of my clients is New York City, and they have very little leniency for anything up there, so this is not New York City.
This is not New York City, having been told several times in New York. Myself, we are not New York City. I'm going to just circle back to those questions that I asked. Is there any way to do this program without collecting that data, that specific data of tracking individual cars?
There is. We don't have to store the information. We can just use it as a trigger point. I've worked personally with the ACLU on setting policies. It's an issue across the country. Law enforcement has been using LPR for 30, 40 years. It's been in parking forever, so it's not something new. It's just a matter of crafting a policy that everyone's comfortable with, where we're protecting those privacy issues, and that can be done. Like I said, every city we work with that has LPR, which is pretty much everyone nowadays, they have to deal with that issue. So it's just a matter of that policy that's established.
Okay, so there is, okay, well, that's good news. And in terms of that staff that we talked about, and the cost that I think Josh, you talked about would be part of how we figured to make sure that this program would cover all of our costs to implement it and the rest. I would assume that some of those costs would include those salaries of all of that personnel, and that this, even y'all are consultants, this program would be under the direction of our Director of Public Safety now? Is that where it would fall in terms of?
We've talked about a couple of different areas because it ties in with beach management and it also ties in with facilities. So I think we'll have a much clearer answer as we get close to implementation, but it will report to some staff member within the town in terms of having a connection between us and the contractor.
Is that how y'all usually put these programs into place?
It's pretty common to go that route.
Okay.
Yes.
So, and then, and Glenn had a question that I thought was a good one with regard to just making sure that our island residents are the top priority. And I think our staff knows that, and I think we all agree on that one. I'll leave the rest, which are a lot of the details that I'm going to be very interested in making sure do just that, which is to protect our island and to provide the service that I think we identified, and not grow our government to a point where we are extending ourselves into people's lives by tracking data and collecting data and saving their data. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Tammy. Jack, I'm satisfied of your firm's comprehensive, flexible approach. I look forward to working with you in developing a island-sourced plan for Hilton Head. I think we have unique challenges in that regard. I see your presentation as an opportunity for brand enhancement You used the term frictionless parking. Because we're a hospitality island, I think it's incredibly important that we have frictionless parking to the extent that we can. You mentioned parking and transportation connection. I'm glad to see Mary Lou here today with Palmetto Breeze to be a part of this conversation. I think that is very important, and Councilman Brown mentioned that as well. The one thing that, you don't have to answer this today, but it's a question that maybe it would be worth just the moment. As chairman, I have the unenviable position of trying to keep us on track in a time, and we're using a lot of it in this presentation. But the question is, it seems as though your approach is 100%, as you presented, 100% reliant on technology. What do you do with the consumer or the customer who doesn't have that capability?
Sure, you always need a alternative. So people that don't have a cell phone or don't want to pay with credit cards.
So is that a person at the gate?
No, so what we'll have is we'll have phone numbers posted throughout the facilities that they can call, and we can arrange for that payment to take place. There's a number of ways to go about that.
In the interest of time, I'm going to accept your answer as there is a way to deal with that issue.
Okay.
Okay, Josh, is there anything else before we have a motion to authorize the town manager?
No, sir, but I think you can see why I said I'm excited this morning. I think they've brought together a really great program, and it puts us on a good path.
Glenn, are you in a position to offer the motion, or do you want us to do it locally?
Mr. Chairman, if you can hear me.
We can.
I will move that we move the matter of negotiating a contract to be approved by the town council, that we move that forward to the town manager to negotiate with Jack and his firm to bring forth a parking program which will be enforced for the next tourist season.
Thank you. Is there a second to Glenn's motion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Tammy. Please call the roll, Krista.
Yes, sir. Mr. Brown?
Support.
Mrs. Becker?
I support this, and I just want to make sure my comments are clear that as we enter in this, my concern about protecting privacy is going to be implemented along the way as we discuss it further. Thank you.
Mr. Stanford?
For the motion.
And Mr. Ames?
For the motion.
Motion carries, sir.
Thank you very much, and Jack, welcome to the island again, and look forward to seeing you, more of you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
The next item on the agenda is a discussion of the adopted short-term rental ordinance and the selection of a third-party vendor for short-term rental monitoring.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, council committee members. I'm Sean Colin, Assistant Town Manager, and I'm happy to be here before you this morning. Thank you. I'm stepping in a little bit. Ann Siren, who has been sort of the face of the short-term rental initiative, for the town, is out of town today, and she has resigned and is taking a new position in Illinois, and we'll have her for another week. So we're losing some institutional knowledge, but we are capable and will continue to move this effort forward. I want to thank her for her help in getting us this far. And I'm here to provide really an update today. I'm not asking the committee for a lot of direction, just that we're on the right path. We have a big road ahead to get this, the short-term rental ordinance implementation pieces in place, including the selection of a third-party vendor, hiring of staff, getting the system ready, the communication plan. And so I'm going to go through a brief presentation and then ask the committee just to endorse that we're on the right direction, and we'll continue to move forward with the implementation of this ordinance implementation and then next step. So as we've done in the past, we've started with a project purpose statement, give the update on where we are in implementation of the ordinance. the selection process of a third-party vendor, and then some other issues that we'll talk about, which I'm going to recommend we address at a future date. This is the purpose statement. It's been in the past several. I won't go through it in detail, and I know we need to move forward with this from a timing standpoint. So we were asked to craft and bring forward an ordinance. We've done that. The council has adopted it, and then also the committee had looked at a framework for implementation, and then some next steps that we can talk about here in a minute. Where we're at right now in summer of 2022, there was a lot of work going in to get the ordinance adopted, but we've also had a lot of work that we've been doing since the adoption to begin this implementation. It's been a joint effort across many departments of the town. I want to thank April Akins, John Troyer, and Finance being there right alongside as we move this thing forward. We solicited bids, we've received responses, went through an evaluation process, and we believe we are at the point to recommend a vendor. And we plan to bring them forward to the August 31st meeting of the committee for a presentation similar to what Jack just provided. We're working to develop that good neighbor brochure, and then create the communication plan, hire personnel to get this implementation plan in place to be able to meet the service delivery and expectations of the ordinance. We're negotiating with that vendor. We were impressed with the presentations, and we're happy with who we believe is the preferred client. They'll be able to show you a demonstration on data and capabilities and reporting that we so dearly need in order to make decisions as we go forward. And again, they'll give a presentation at the meeting to this committee later this month. I don't want to get too deep in the detail on this, but the committee did, along with moving the ordinance recommendation forward, look at a framework for some high occupancy homes and high floor and structures that took up an awful lot of area on typically single family lots. What we really want to do is have the vendor on board, and we need data. I don't know the issues yet. We knew that we need to have good neighbors and put a program in place, and that's what we did with the ordinance. But these additional items, we need to have the information that we can rely on to make those decisions. And that's the whole point of kind of moving forward with this first step. We will develop a preliminary framework on when the data will be available. Again, you're going to see a demo on the 31st, and we'll begin working with the vendor once contracted on tracking that information and begin to develop trends and share that information regularly with the community. And then we can use it to make data-driven decisions on policy changes in concert with other things that are in play. We have the Redevelopment Initiative area. We have a capacity study or a condition and trends analysis. We are working toward a growth framework, an island-wide master plan, and I'm going to make a public statement right now that I don't want to do things piecemeal. I want to look at it from a big picture standpoint, because when I talk about the LMO in a minute, I think we've been a victim of looking at things individually rather than collectively. We have done a great job with our plan. We've done a great job with our strategic action plan, linking that to community expectations, and I think we need to do the same thing with this effort and others, including the LMO. There were some other items that popped up through discussion to look at in sort of the next phase. I'm listing them here just because we're inventorying those. I am not comfortable to move any of this forward until we have the data and have the vendor on board. But I'm making you aware that we are tracking this information. And as we learn more, these items may be appropriate to advance. What I'm pledging now is that we will continue to investigate all of these items as we learn more data and come forward to the Planning Commission to request direction as we conclude this implementation piece, which is extremely important. We know we have thousands of short-term rentals. The debate continues. When we have our vendor here, I think we'll have a better idea of that number. But in order to be ready to implement the ordinance that was adopted, we need to have all hands on deck and focusing on that effort, and that's what we intend to do. I'm happy to answer questions, but really an update to let you know that we'll have more information in the vendor here on the 31st.
Okay, I've received, and I think all members of the Public Planning Committee have received concerns about the elimination of parking dimensions. Was there a statement you wanted to make on that?
Yes, sir, and thank you for reminding me of that. We've just adopted an ordinance. We don't yet know the implications of an impact because we need to get it in place. I need to be able to monitor and evaluate, along with staff, the impacts of the ordinance. I'm not comfortable yet with recommending a parking solution other than what was adopted currently in the ordinance. And like any other code provision, if we find that there needs to be a modification, we will bring that forward at the appropriate time. I'm hesitant to start pulling at the string to unravel what we've got in place, before we've had a chance to put it in place and implement and see the implications. So yes, sir, I removed that from discussion because I'm not comfortable or ready to have that discussion at this time. It will remain in the ordinance, as part of the ordinance and implemented as was drafted.
All right, thank you. Tammy, questions, comments?
I do, thank you. Hi, Sean. I realize you pulled that piece from the discussion, but I'm going to add some facts on it. You correctly pointed out that we adopted an ordinance that hasn't even been put into effect yet, and there's already attempts or thoughts about revising it. So I'm glad to hear that there has been a rethinking of that. But just for information's sake, I thought I would talk about the way it's currently written. We have 9 by 18 as being our spaces that are required on site on an improved spot for parking. In the 21st century, a Jeep Wrangler has a length of 160, almost 167 inches, which is 14 feet, 6+ feet in width. A Toyota Land Cruiser, 16+ feet in length, 7 feet in width. A Range Rover, 17 feet in length, 7 feet in width. And a Chevrolet Suburban, 19 feet in length and 7 feet in width. I point those out because our 9 by 18 is a correct dimension for most of those. And if you look around and just anecdotally take into consideration the types of cars you see being brought onto the island, filled with our guests, tourists and visitors, those are the type of cars you see most often. And therefore, I think just that simple amount of data should lead us to believe that we are correct and that that ordinance as it's been written does not need any adjustment. For those who might argue differently and say, well, my property is older and we don't have the space in our driveway, et cetera, to accommodate that. I'll make an analogy that may or may not hit home for some people, but it is this. I own an 18.5-foot boat. I can fit 4 to 6 people on it. But I have 20 friends that I like to bring out on my boat with me. My boat doesn't accommodate that or will sink, and there'll be a disaster. My boat is not appropriate. If your land and the place that you have is not appropriate so that you don't have a sinking, disastrous situation that we all experience, then maybe short-term rental on that property is not appropriate. And so while I realize that you had withdrawn it from your discussion today, this point I hope is well made and that future thinking takes that into consideration because I will continue to make it. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Morning again, Sean.
Good morning.
Just a few things. In the one of the the attachments here, it talks about hiring, I think, 6 positions to help implement the plan. Any indication as to where we are on those 6 positions? All, none, some?
So they're not necessarily under my span of control. I know finance has solicited a position. I don't know if they're probably evaluating candidates at this point, so they have interviews coming. Code enforcement was part of that. There was some to start early in the year and then some a little bit later in the year. I know that the canvassing has gone out. I don't know if they've been selected or hired yet.
So I can say that the public safety director has been hired.
Yes.
He's going to start on the 15th. Given that staff are going to report to him, we wanted to wait till he was on board to then help in selecting them. But we've been actively soliciting applications to hand over to him once he gets here.
Perfect.
Thank you. And thank you.
Okay, fair enough. I know that this program is very important to us as a town. We've passed an ordinance. We've got a phase 2 that we're trying to get our arms wrapped around, so having sufficient expertise in place is going to be essential for us moving the ball forward. So I'm glad to hear that we're going in the right direction there. And the advisory committee was talked about. It was one of those recommendations that came from town council, and I also see that it is on that list of comments that you've received from the public since our last meeting. So I just put a little emphasis on that one also. I think that's important to help drive this forward, that we do have those that are on the ground experiencing not only the benefits from short-term rentals, but also the nuances from short-term rentals. Collectively, we're moving together so that phase 2 is very productive. And the last thing is, I don't get out much. Typically, I'm always here. But I did take a trip to the Pinehurst this last weekend.
Was it golfing?
Yeah, I play a little golf. Shot 76 both days, Josh. But the listing said that the house that we stayed in had an occupancy level of 10. We showed up with 8, and yours truly had to sleep on the couch because I was the youngest of the crew. I only make that point because I think occupancy is a huge part of this equation, and we are just not talking about it enough. And if we can really get a handle on that through our reporting and gathering data and whatnot, I think we'll be able to craft policy so that we're at a better place down the road. So those are my comments, and thanks staff for continuing to push this forward.
Thanks, Alex. Glenn?
Thank you. Sean, thank you for your report. It's my understanding that we're not being asked to take any action right now. You're not really presenting anything to us. You're just telling us we're going to hear more. I look forward to hearing more about this very important and vital subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate the presentation, and I don't have further comments, but I am going to allow public comment on this issue, and because I overlooked it on the former issue, if you happen to have a comment about the parking, feel free to come up and make your comment. But seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, Palmetto Breeze Trolley Service. Oh, what? No, either. It's short-term rentals. Please. Your name for the record, sir.
My name is Ed Ernst. I've lived on Hilton Head since 1984. And one of the things several of you have mentioned is the issue with short-term rentals. The transition of zoned single-family residences to commercial use as short-term rental units in historic single-family neighborhoods of the island has experienced explosive growth over the last several years. This transition has been facilitated in part by the lack of oversight by the town of Hilton Head Island, the absence of regulations addressing short-term rental of single-family residences, and failure to use existing zoning and building code requirements to control the same. The unabated conversion of zoned single-family residences to commercial use as profit-generating rental properties is detrimental to the survival of historic island family-oriented neighborhoods. The continuation of this conversion of zoned single-family residences adversely diminishes the right of safe and peaceful enjoyment of their homes for full-time island residents and creates health and life safety issues for both residents and short-term rental inhabitants. Consider the following. Adopted general definitions for single-family residence. A non-commercial dwelling that is intended to be occupied by one family, unit composed of one person or two people, no matter how related, or three or more persons, all of whom are related to each other by blood, marriage, legal adoption, guardianship, or custodianship. A group of individuals related by blood, adoption, or marriage, or a number of unrelated roommates not exceeding the number of bedrooms in a residence. Individual dwelling unit with no commercial use. Any real property owned and occupied by no one other than the owner and the owner's immediate family. Typical accepted occupancy limits per building codes and zoning regulations: 2 persons per bedroom, 2 persons per bedroom plus 1 additional individual. A description of a typical single-family residence in historic family neighborhoods being rented for short-term occupancy. Size between 1,100 and 2,100 square feet, 2 to 2.5 baths, 3 bedrooms. Observed occupancy at short-term rental units: 6 to 20 individuals, 3 to 8 vehicles. A currently listed house for sale in the area in the real estate listing description says a rental machine with no POA or no rental restrictions.
Sir, we have a 3-minute
Oh,
limit, but
okay.
you're close to what you want to wrap up.
I've got a little more to go, but I guess I'll just read the last.
I'm very interested in getting a copy of what you're reading.
Okay. Then the last, I'll just skip through a bunch of this, but the unbridled growth of the conversion of various types of single-family occupancies at various locations to short-term rental units has created an unequitable detriment for primary home owners. The deterioration of the quality of life in historic island family residential neighborhoods allegedly protected by elements of the LMO and overlay zoning districts has been largely unsuccessful. Immediate action to define, control, regulate, and relegate short-term rental units to zoned resort districts and planned unit developments where permitted should be indicated. Action must be taken to remove existing and prohibit future short-term rental operations in historic single-family neighborhoods.
Sir, as courteous as I can be, I think we're going to have to.
Can I read the last sentence of that?
Yes, you may.
Okay. Let's see, where was I? Unfortunately, the recently adopted ordinance does nothing to protect the owner-occupied single-family residences in historic neighborhoods. Consider the impact and loss this creates and the perspective you would have if this abuse of single-family occupancy occurred in your neighborhood.
Thank you. If you would leave that with me, I'd be very appreciative.
Okay. There's 1 or 2 typos on it I didn't intended for
I'm not worried about
presentation.
that. You've spent a great deal of time preparing it, and I think that it's worth having a copy of it.
Thank you.
And Chair, if I can just ask, maybe I'll get a copy.
Of course, I'll do that. Frank? Welcome.
Welcome.
Nice to see your smiling face.
Nice to be back. This is just passing on some experience that I had in the information technology business where we worked with people like yourself in lots of places with regard to the parking thing. Just a couple of tips. One, please, when you do the contract, keep it loose. Because the tendency for people like us is to have a very tight contract that's going to cover everything. I can say unequivocally right now, you don't have a clue what you're going to really buy. Because what's going to happen is people will say, well, how about off-site parking? Well, why don't we get dynamic pricing? Well, what happens if somebody gets sick? What happens if we have somebody who's really bad? I mean, all kinds of things are going to happen that you don't anticipate. And so you get a nice tight contract that looks good on a piece of paper, but the reality is it ain't going to work. And it'll just be contention, and you're not going to work it out. Because the first step on this, phase one, is the first year or two, getting this thing going and making it work as a partner. Number two, town council has to stay out of the contracting business. This is a staff job. You need to appoint somebody who's going to be in charge of this program. And that person needs to be appointed pretty soon. And that person needs to be at the table when you're negotiating the contract. That person needs to know what's going on and be responsible for what was negotiated. Because that person is to be responsible for the delivery of services to you folks. Hold that person responsible, but appoint him or her as soon as you can. I think you've got a good firm. I'd be happy to help in any way I possibly can. But that's just the experience that I had and saw many times.
Thank you, Frank.
Okay?
Appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Sean, I beg your pardon. Somebody else, please.
Good morning. I'm Beth Petra with Beachside Getaway and the Hilton Head Vacation Renters Association. Just a quick comment on the parking. I do understand that a lot of the larger vehicles will maintain those spots, but me personally, outside of the business, I'm a single mom in a very small car. I'm not traveling with 26 people that are all trying to cram into one vehicle. So as far as a short-term rental in a single-family home that may not have that 9x18 spot, but can still accommodate 4 or 5 cars, everybody is not necessarily coming in a large vehicle. The other side is as we continue to look at the occupancy and the size of the properties that we're presenting on Hilton Head, I don't have the exact numbers, but the percentage of large 6, 7, 8 bedroom homes on the island is much, much smaller than those of the 2, 3, and 4, where a 19x8 spot for 4 bedrooms, trying to come up with 4 of them in one small space like that will be near impossible. And these are not for new properties being built, but just the historical short-term rental areas on the island that have always had these predetermined spots. So I do ask that be considered in the conversation in the future, as well as we move forward towards the topic of the occupancy and how to correct that going forward.
Thank you for your comments. Sean, would you like to introduce the next topic on the agenda?
Yes, sir, if we're ready to move on. The next item is the Palmetto Breeze Trolley Service and Rider Experience Update. I wanted to just make a couple of introductory comments and say that I've enjoyed working with Mary Lou. I know we've had staff and Jennifer, others have worked with Mary Lou over the years to help to start the trolley service and to move it to where it is today. I think the trolley service has grown since inception and serves a lot more people. It's increased efficiency of operations. It's modified time of service to be more effective. We've modified trolley stops and as well as route expansion. But as we move forward and continue to hopefully grow the service, I think that the time now is at hand to question how we strengthen and enhance the brand and experience. And I know that we talk about numbers an awful lot, and we've been able to see that growth, and it's been tremendous. But ways that we can expand and enhance the island experience and user experience should be vetted. I've identified a couple of questions, and I apologize to Mary Lou. I've given her them very late in the game here, and so I know she'll give her presentation. But I think as we move forward, we are trying to outline this corridors project to improve the condition and consistency and experience through the entire island and the corridors. Some of that's going to be transit and trolley stops. Some of that's the trolley and transit service that's provided on the island. So I have a couple of very direct questions. I'm just going to throw them out there because I think we need to start having the discussion on these types of elements to understand how we continue to partner with LRTA, Palmetto Breeze, and Island Breeze Trolley Service to see what their capabilities are, and then see where we have an opportunity to potentially augment and increase the user experience and expectations that we have. So one, and I provided these to Mary Lou, and does LRTA Palmetto Breeze have the capability to introduce alternative vehicles? We know electric vehicles are growing in popularity across the country, and believe electric vehicles are more aligned with the Island brand. We are starting here at the town to transition back to some fleet vehicles that are electric in nature, and want to know if they have the capability and capacity to do that. Also, smaller vehicles. We've talked a couple of times about open air, but I think it's good just to go on record. So electric vehicles, are there smaller vehicles that can provide maybe more concierge service, user experience in some areas, and open air vehicles? Then maybe just as importantly too, as we talk about transit and trolleys and stops, does LRTA have funding capacity or availability or access to funding sources to help enhance its equipment or service experience, including the transit stops? I believe that the corridor project that we're currently on to talk about intersection design and medians and all of that will include this transit and transportation stops, look at bus stops or transit stops, and try to develop a consistent pattern so that it's recognizable, it's suitable with our brand, and just want to know if, as we continue to partner, the opportunity for funding for those types of elements. So those are my comments. I've laid out a couple of questions, I think, to begin the discussion on the user experience, the rider experience, and how we better align everything that we do, not just with this service, but all services with our island brand. So,
Thank you very much, Sean. I appreciate staff's taking the time to think about that. Mary Lou, welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Chairman Ames and the committee for allowing me to come back and talk about our trolley services and Palmetto Breeze. And I don't know if you want me to go straight to those questions or talk about the season. How would you like me to move forward?
I think we've all reviewed the numbers. Does anybody have a comment on the numbers? Glenn, anything you want to add? I have.
Mary Lou, I'm curious about why the numbers are a little bit lower this year than they were last year. I would have expected the exact opposite.
And, you know, we were as well. Our April, we hit it out of the park in April. We were really anticipating a very, very busy season. And our season isn't terrible, but we carried more people last year. Upon evaluating it, it seems that we've had a whole lot of afternoon rain. And you can look directly at Memorial Day weekend. And in 2021, we carried 800 or 900 more people in 3 days than we did this year. You look at the weather for Memorial Day weekend, it wasn't great. When we get to July 4th this year, July 4th weekend was beautiful weather. We surpassed last year's ridership. So I think what happens is our ridership is very dependent on the weather. If we have kick-up storms 3 or 4 o'clock in the PM when people are getting ready to go out to dinner, they don't come out and get on the trolley and ride it around and experience the island that way. Hopefully, I mean, we did need the rain, so I'm glad we got it, but it was sad that it affected our trolley ridership. And the other thing I would say, because I've thought about this quite a bit, is that last year we had record occupancy on the island. I can remember in March and April, people saying the island's booked until August. When you look at this year, we don't have that many visitors here, and so I think that has an impact as well. But we're still pushing forward to try to get as many riders as we can. Some of our efforts are through our social media. We have very robust marketing campaign. We have grown our social media. And I'm like you, Tamara, I really don't do social media that much, but we have gone up 64% in Facebook followers, 51% in likes, 150% in our Facebook reach, which we keep track of all that. Our profile visits are up 255%. Our Instagram reach is up 43%. Our Instagram profile visits are up 77%. And approximately 75% of our Facebook audience is located outside of the Low Country. I can go into the website, but again, we have a lot more activity there. What I would like to talk about is what we are doing to enhance the rider experience. We did put video monitors on the vehicles, and we have quite a few videos. The videos all had to be closed captioned before we could play them because we didn't want the volume distracting the driver or the riders. So we do have loops about historic Mitchellville, the Gullah Museum, Crescendo, the Lantern Parade, the St. Patrick's Day Parade, the Sea Turtle Patrol, and the arts community. We have videos on all of those on the island, and we're still in the process of developing more videos. We use content already made and then get it closed captioned. So that's been a good success. Our Rider's Guide, we printed 40,000 of those. I think you all saw them the last meeting with the 20 panels and the advertising, and we've distributed 34,000 at this point in time, so we're hopeful we'll make it to the end of the year without having to have them reprinted. We have lobby displays with our schedule and maps, nice big lobby displays at the Westin, Hilton Head Beach and Tennis, and the Marriott Courtyard. We also mail brochures to anyone that asks for them. So when folks are planning their vacations and ask for brochures, we mail them out. The thing I wanted to talk about, really the biggest way we enhance the rider's experience is through our drivers. And we've not had one single complaint this year on any trolley driver, and I find that to be very rewarding. Last year, we had a little bumpy ride with the operators as far as who was on duty, and people would quit, and we were replacing people. This year we have a solid group that really do a great job for us. And I have some trolley testimonials that came in, which I would love to read. The first one, here we go. It's from folks on our website. It says, "We were in Hilton Head last week, and it was the first time we used the trolley. It was great. Lars was our driver, and he was so kind. Thanks, Hilton Head, for this amazing service. MR from Chicago." Another comment, "Nicest bus you'll ever ride." "Love the free trolley" is another comment. "I used the Breeze trolley last week, and it was wonderful to get my family everywhere that we wanted to go on the island. Use the free Breeze trolley, goes all over the island and comes every 30 minutes. Super service. Everyone's suggestion on the Breeze is spot on, easy and clean." So these are all on our Facebook and social media, where not only are they posting, people are reading all these
We'll look
comments.
into it. Thank you.
You
You don't have to continue
All
reading.
right, I have
We
more.
get the message.
Yes. So I do believe having the good drivers that actually interact with the passengers. We do the ambassador training with USCB every year. I think that is our best way to enhance the experience with the passengers, is to have those drivers that reach out and really help everybody. And upcoming promotions, we're looking at a couple of things right now. One would be a passenger appreciation weekend on Labor Day, and Brian Sullivan, our marketing person, is working with different businesses along the trolley route to come up with some specials and discounts that he can promote. And he'll have some way for passengers to give feedback and to on the online feedback form and get these rewards. We're also looking at this trend where people are painting things and hiding it, and other people are finding them, and it seems to be a thing in lots of communities. And so we want to do a Breeze Trolley Rocks. And what we're going to do, we have some volunteers that are going to paint some rocks, and we're going to start, I think, with about 20 rocks, and we're going to hide them along the routes. And it's a social media driven scavenger hunt, and the goals are to increased ridership, social media growth, promotions for culture, HHI, and opportunities for local businesses along our route. So we're just developing that now, and we hope to do that right before Labor Day. It shouldn't take a whole lot of time, but people get a rock, it's painted, they'll post it, and just generate some more excitement about Hilton Head and the trolleys. Off-season, we participate in a lot of festivals and events. We do the Crescendo Kickoff, we do the Lantern Parade, we do holiday events, and we also carry the stewards for the St. Patrick's Parade at the end. We pick them all up and take them to Riley's. So getting back to the questions that Sean proposed to me.
Before you jump into that, I wanted to go back to the small decline in numbers from last year. I called up Bill Miles at the chamber to see whether or not there was a connection there, and as a matter of fact, in May, occupancy was down 10%, and in June, down 10%, so it parallels what you were saying.
Thank you.
However, he said that average daily rate was up 6% and up 7% at the same time. Go ahead, let's address Sean's question.
So I think these are great questions, and I think it's something I've learned as I've been here is I would call it operating on a shoestring budget is what I would call. We do not have a dedicated funding source. I think I've said this many times, but larger transit systems, more robust transit systems have some type of a tax, a millage, some type of a transportation fund so that they can grow their systems and plan things up to 5 years or 10 years in advance, knowing, the way we can progress. Well, for Palmetto Breeze, we do not have that. We operate on a reimbursement basis. We get reimbursed from the SCDOT and from the Federal Transit Administration after we spend money. Allowed expenses, we apply to get the money back, and we only get a portion of that back. And that's why I come and ask for local match. So we're pretty, I want to say hamstrung as far as being able to do any big initiatives, but it doesn't mean we wouldn't be planning for things, because what I found working in this environment is if I have a need, I had a need for commuter buses. We didn't have $600,000 a bus in our budget, but because we had that need and I put it out to the state, to the FTA, and I think that's the process. And then we're receiving, we've gotten 5 buses replaced, and the 2 of them are coming this month. But it was slow, it was cobbled together, Little CARES Act, some lapsing funds, however we can get funds. So can we do electric vehicles? It is the thing in the United States right now that a lot of transits are going to electric vehicles. I think we could put that on our list of things we want to try to do and look for the funding. And so I think that's a possibility. The smaller vehicles, we can do smaller vehicles. And we could do even the golf carts in open air, but we can't do it with FTA, Federal Transit Administration, or SCDOT funding, because all of our vehicles are crash tested and they're certified. And so the trolleys had to get crash tested when they just developed them. And so in order to buy vehicles with grant money, they have to have been through Altoona crash testing. And so that would leave out all of those open air vehicles. They're not going to have passed the crash testing. Could we do a smaller vehicle? We could. Could we do concierge service? I'm a yes person. I believe we can do a lot of things. But we need to have the funding in place. We need to have the plan. And I think also, I really do hope that the employee shortage is short-lived and that we can go back to having employees. We've struggled with that. And then the other thing right now, the supply chain, it's real for us. I ordered all the vehicles that we had money for 2 years ago, and I haven't even got all of them yet. And the new vehicles are probably 50% higher in price. But I expended all the money I had for vehicles, still waiting for them to come in. I have 5 more that need to come in. So it seems to me that even if you had the money right now, it's a 2 or 3 year delay in a lot of cases to get new things until supply chain issues relax. The second question he asked me was about funding for enhancements and including transit stops. We have the ability every year to program money into our FTA grants, and one of them is bus stop enhancements. And we do have money in there right now for, to build bus shelters on Hilton Head. The first year we put in, and they're all different line items, and we put in to buy shelters. And so Ann Siren at that time said, oh, I don't think Hilton Head wants a prefabricated shelter. I think we'd rather build them. So we called FTA and they go, oh no, you can't use that money for this. So we had to liquidate that money in the grant, put in another grant to build. We have that money there right now. It's a starter. I think we have $80,000 in grant money, which is 80% of the cost. So the way we would like to go about the shelter project is to partner with Hilton Head, partner with a business. We had a meeting with the Watterson Group 2-3 weeks ago to talk about this, and they're proposing, and it'll come before the council, to enhance the stop of the new business they built at Pope Avenue. And they want to utilize some of our grant funding to, and they understand what's going on, and it's kind of like a prototype. Is this what the town likes? And that will come through the review. And I look forward to that partnership we have to get some kind of prototype down so we can start to do shelter enhancements on the island.
Okay. Let's move to members. Alex, do you have questions, comments you'd like to address with Mary Lou?
Yeah. Great morning. Good to see you again. And I appreciate Sean taking the time to ask those very direct questions. And I also appreciate you describe yourself as a yes, ma'am, because you want to get things done.
I do.
And I, for one, have encouraged you to ask us to help you be that yes, ma'am. And as I appreciate the Watterson Group stepping up and wanting to make a beautiful stop in front of their new business, there's stops that we already have on our route that, in my opinion, are not adequate. Mm-hmm. So if you've got 80% and you're looking for 20%, come check us out. I think that that's the deliberations that we need to have at the council level during our budget discussions, because it's unfair to ask you the question if you can do it and us not have the money behind you to do it, okay? So I would just continue to encourage you to be emboldened with your request to us outside of what we are currently supplementing. Now to the other questions about, alternative vehicles, smaller vehicles, I think that's a direction that we definitely need to go. As I read through your data, it's very telling that the higher numbers are in the concentrated areas, okay? Mm-hmm. And I think we are starting to develop an attitude that you can come to Hilton Head and leave your car, either where you came from or leave it where you're staying here on Hilton Head and still get around. And I think that's important because our parking situation is not the best. So going back to this partnership between transportation and parking, it's critical that we continue to develop this attitude. So I know that there are other places on Hilton Head that have concentration of our visitors outside of places like the Westin. So us expanding that service will get us to a better place. And I know that costs money, Marilyn. I get it, okay? But again, just asking you the question if you can do it, I would more appreciate you saying, yes, we can do it, and here's how much it's gonna cost to get it done. Mm-hmm. Because that puts us in a different position in terms of the request. And, the funding situation, we're raining money at the moment, but I understand that those monies have stipulations, and I understand that those monies are not necessarily going to continue to come, okay? So if we as a community are wanting to continue with the enhancement of public transportation, then we're gonna have to find monies to do it, and not necessarily just pass that on to the consumer. Again, I know I've said this more than once to you, but I wanna say it out loud, not just for you, but for the community and for my colleagues. This is important. It's not free, and it's not cheap. If we want to do it, we've got to put the bucks behind it to get it done. So thank you for being here. Thank you for the presentation. And just as a side note, Councilman Ames, you're right as far as our visitation and our traffic here on Hilton Head in May and June. It has been down, okay? Last year, I've told people in the business world, forget chasing 2021 numbers, because it was just something that you probably not see again for a while. So it's not alarming that those numbers are off just a little bit. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And I did want to add one more thing. The grants that we have, the grants are matched. They're matched when we get them. When we come around asking for local match, we match that grant. So it isn't money that I need to get bus stop enhancements. I need staff help as far as what is wanted. Do we need to pour pads? That kind of thing. And generally, we partner with a locality where they would pour the pad and do the certain things, and then we would
Just to be clear, when you said staff help, you're talking about the town staff, not your staff?
No, it's town staff.
Okay, thank you.
That would be, we could move forward if we could get somebody on that can make the decisions for the
Okay,
town.
thank you. Becca?
Thank you, Mary Lou. And before I start, I wanted to go back to something that I know you found important as you were reading the positive thank yous about the bus drivers and the people who are the staff members interacting with our residents and visitors. I appreciate that, and I just want you to know, and for the others who are doing that job to know, my stepfather was a Houston Transit bus driver his whole career. And while the years that he was in my life, those testimonies and those awards in the paper are incredibly meaningful to them. And I want to thank them directly and share in your pride for that. I also wanted to talk and just confirm for all of us that we currently do not charge to ride the trolley, correct?
That's
The town
correct.
does not charge. So when we're thinking about incurring additional costs and we're looking at the numbers of ridership as it's increased and how that's been an attractive way to move around the island has now become part of a routine, I guess, that was encouraged by removing even the dollar charge that we initially had put on that. And perhaps it's time, if we are continuing and looking for enhancements, that we begin to look at some sort of charge from the ridership to help us cover that, since anyway. And in terms of those enhancements, you noted a number of things that you have on the screen. I would suggest and ask that perhaps we put something on there that informs our guests and residents even of how we do things on Hilton Head, how we talk about how we preserve our environment and protect our wildlife, and those types of values that Hilton Head is known for, and we encourage everyone to join us in. So that type of information, I think, might be beneficial to everyone. I'm hearing today here a couple of things that I'm unaware of and would like to hear more discussion about, and that's an expansion of corridor project to now include enhancements on 278. And while I understand the need for shelter and that sort of thing, I also am very protective of our island brand and character. And the last thing I want to see in any respect that is happening is 278 becoming to look more and more urbanized. And so certainly our staff and our design criteria need to be not only looked at, but perhaps even scrutinized and developed a little bit more to ensure anything along those lines are incorporated. And I'd be really careful at having a bus stop at every corner for that reason. So, thank you. And yes, I think we all can acknowledge that the pandemic years and the numbers of people who were here is waning. And so the trend will continue, I'm sure. Thank you.
Glenn, do you have comments?
Yes, thank you. Mary Lou, I asked the question about the numbers being down. I accept the answers that you have given. It makes sense to me. I believe that we had a lot of pent-up demand from the period of the pandemic, which popped out last year, and now probably we are returning to something more normal. So thank you for clarifying and giving a complete answer on that. And David, of course, reinforced that by data from the chamber. I am very impressed with what you're doing towards what we call brand enhancement. I think that is vital, that we continue to tell the wonderful story of this paradise where we live. I was not aware that you had started doing videos. I'm very glad to hear about that, but I do wonder about closed caption and no sound. I have ridden many times the buses going out to the Heritage, and there has been a video which is in some cases advertising, but in most cases promoting the island. And it doesn't distract anyone as far as I can tell. So I'm wondering if there is some regulation that limits that, or if this is just a judgment call that someone's made. And if it's just a judgment call, I would wonder if you would consider letting the audio portion of that out. The idea of hotel lobby displays is outstanding. Again, I was not aware of that. I would ask you, however, do you have that at the airport on Hilton Head Island? And if not, I would suggest that maybe you consider that as another way to provide the information to the tourists and people who are visiting here with us. My encounters with all of your drivers have always been outstanding. I've always met with a smiling face, with someone with a cooperative attitude, and usually they can answer the questions. So I think overall you're doing a great job. I think that we're still in the infancy of local transportation system here. We're learning, and I think we're learning a lot, and your leadership has been invaluable. So thank you for your report, but do consider trying the video with audio. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Glenn. Mary Lou, for me, it's a question of who has the responsibility to develop an enhanced system of movement on the island. I think council is probing the idea that smaller vehicles, electric vehicles, perhaps some route adjustments, Pope Avenue corridor, wherever, might make sense. And the question that I'm asking you, do you want the responsibility to research and plan options and cost out options? Or is that something that you feel really resides in the town's bailiwick?
Well, this whole trolley adventure has been very cooperative, and I have to say I worked with Jennifer Ray and Ann Siren through this whole process, and it was invaluable because not being from here, I came here with this job. I didn't know all these things, and I didn't know who Charles Frazier was. So I do now. I know a lot of things, and the staff has helped tremendously because they let me know what the town's looking for. With Ann, we went over route changes. Every year we start in about January. What do we think? And she had great input on areas. And so we've had a very good collaborative response working with them. Our staff is very small. We are a small budget as far as transit goes. We do not have any planning personnel on our staff. We utilize the LCOG for our planning work, Stephanie Rossi, and she's been very helpful, and Jenny Kozak before that. But your planning department really is the key to us getting this planned out, because I'm not a planner, but I try.
Okay, well, that answers my question. It suggests that the town needs to own and advance an alternate idea for smaller vehicles, electric vehicles, any Pope Avenue corridor adjustments. And it makes sense also that most of your funding prohibits those kinds of vehicles. And so it really does suggest that we may have to have two systems working cooperatively on the
Well, I
island.
looked into the one in Citrus County, Florida that had the golf cars and called down there, and they did a cooperative funding with the downtown merchants and with, forget who else, they had some kind of a set aside from one of the programs, either ARA or CARES or something, that they were able to use, no FTA funding. So if those vehicles were funded and also the operating of them, if we could still do it for the town if that's what you wanted, but we would just carve it out like this is not coming out of the FTA funds and would not ask for reimbursement for that service. And that could be done.
Okay, thank you, Mary Lou. Sean, are there any other questions staff would like to address to Mary Lou at this time? Okay, Mary Lou, thanks for making the time to come here, and thanks for all of your
Thank you.
information.
I would like to add one more thing, just.
You may.
Since I'm standing here. One of our biggest requests we get, and we get it starting in about February, and we get it all through the fall, is people want us to extend the season. And I just wanted to let you know that people are asking, can we start in March? Can we go through till November? And we always say we'll take it under advisement. And the only thing that stops us there is it's a bigger budget, a bigger operating
Well,
budget.
that's exactly addressed what Alex was asking for. If people are suggesting that they want to extend the service, what would that cost the town?
I can give you proposals for next year. I'll go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Mary Lou, in that, sorry, may I jump in before you leave? In that request for what that would cost, I'd also be interested in knowing where those inquiries and requests are coming from. Are they from a handful of tourists who are coming in for that part of the season, or is it residential inquiry?
Okay, we'll track that.
Thank you very much. And I would like to take a few minutes break right here before we get into the Alamo, because I think it's going to be, take a little bit of time. So take a break if you'd like. I'm going to.
The staff recommendation on the next item is that the Public Planning Committee review the list of proposed LMO amendments and provide feedback on the list of amendments to advance. Is Sean here? Here he comes. While Sean is coming here, we all received a public comment from a Mr. Wexler who talked about the need for more information, talking about what the why, the impact, and also the relationship to the land use. I think he hit the nail on the head, and I would also appreciate, and perhaps the rest of Public Planning Committee would appreciate, understanding the why, the impact, and the relationship to land use. So, Sean, as you present Tier 1A, if you could, in a sense, address those issues as well, I would appreciate it. And just as a general approach to today, it's my understanding that staff has already taken a good deal of time preparing Tier 1A, a list of what, a dozen or so amendments, and that Tier 1B rises above Tier 2 and 3, but what we're trying to accomplish today is moving Tier 1A forward. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We'd like to move, and I'll get into it in a second, but we'd like to move Tier 1A onto the LMO Committee and Planning Commission. Am I ready to start, or I'm sorry? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
May I just jump in a second to follow up on that, David? I also read that comment this morning, and I also thought that Mr. Wexler had hit the nail on the head with that one. From the public's perspective, because they have very little idea of where to find this information. From my perspective, I know where to find the information, but when I'm given a list like this, it'd be so much better. And I'm not saying that your time is less valuable than mine, or that I would never take the time. I will take the time to look each and every one of these up, but if there was a link, so I didn't have to go into the entire LMO and could just hit on them, that would be fantastic, so that I could be as prepared as possible. And those who are listening would understand more completely what it is we're doing. So thank you.
Well, these are great suggestions.
Yeah, we will get to there, but not right now. Go ahead.
Are we ready? Sorry. I'd like to make a couple introductory remarks, and I'll get into the presentation, and appreciate your patience with it, with us. So we're introducing a slightly new process. We're bringing forward to the Public Planning Committee the list of LMO amendments for introduction, and I'm asking you to help me help the program and give us the tools we need to meet the expectations of the community and to improve our code. I do want to make a couple overarching comments to say I'm not comfortable with our current LMO as drafted. When I came here, I was brought to help update the comprehensive plan. First couple questions are, where's your future land use map? You know, we have an existing and a zoning, and so we've never really looked at it from the big picture, okay? And so I'm not comfortable where the LMO is, but I've been involved in many comprehensive plan efforts, and I've drafted land development regulations in the upstate for at least a half a dozen different communities. So I know how to link the comprehensive plan to your land development regulations and to give you the tools you need to be able to implement and advance your community's expectations. We did a really good job with our visioning process and development of our plan, at least to set expectations. We've done a good job linking our plan to the strategic action plan, which has kind of guided our body of work for the past several months. What we really need to do is link it to the land management ordinance, which is a key tool to implement the vision and those recommendations in our plan. So we're working to get there. One element in the strategic plan was a SWOT analysis, and this is sort of the first step. And so I need some help in the interim till we get to that end of the road on the bigger picture. And I'm going to be a little bit selfish. I'm back in this role. I'm assistant town manager. I have span of control over community development, but I'm also the LMO official. It's not my title, but it's a key duty that I have. And so I need to be comfortable with a land management ordinance. I need to make sure that it's meeting the expectations of town council and the community, and that's my goal to move forward. I've gone back and reviewed, again, thank you for your patience. I've gone back and reviewed the history of the land management ordinance since 1987. And you can easily kind of map out the political and community expectation or attitude, and we've seen kind of a back and forth. I think we've always developed code with some constraints, and I think we need to think a little bit differently going forward. So I'm sorry, thank you that's my soapbox moment, but I wanted to provide those overarching comments. And so as I advance these 1A, some of the why is we need some help right now with folks that we have in the community that you've appointed to boards and commissions to help us with our program and the implementation of our code. And then some of the other ones are more specific that we'll get into more detail.
Sean, just a question based on your statement, and I appreciate that because you're going through the visioning and the rewrite of the comprehensive plan. Those that were assisting us from a consultant standpoint, they were very clear with us that this will eventually lead to a land use plan or rewrite of your LMO. And I appreciate staff coming to the conclusion that we're there, okay? I guess my question is, are there any other opportunities outside of the land management ordinance that the format that we're currently using as a tool? Are there any other opportunities to impose land use regulations besides just what I would describe a traditional LMO that we have in front of us?
Well, there are different models that communities use to implement. Some have zoning codes, some have subdivision regulations, some have them combined, whether unified development code, land management ordinance, land development regulations. So I think if we're going to look at this big picture, then let's also look at the tools and options that are out there to help deliver the best result for the community.
Okay, and is there anything at the moment in place to bring council up to speed on some of those other options? We're going to workshop this, or we're going to we don't know, and I'm trying to figure out how can we know?
Yeah, I think as again, hopefully we can make through the tier 1A and then a little bit on tier 1B today. As we continue into that deeper SWOT analysis of the LMO, that's a great point that I think we should consider, and making sure that we're informing council of other mechanisms or other options that we have to move forward.
Just while we're talking about them, so I'm clear on all of that, our LMO are the regulations, the rules, the laws that we follow as we are permitting and ensuring that things are in compliance. Would any of these other outside ideas then be of the same caliber to ensure that we're getting the product in the end that we're looking at? And would those be folded into the LMO, or is this redundant? I'm confused.
Yeah, we wouldn't create competing documents. I'm just saying there's rather than say the LMO is the only way, there's other ways to get there, so.
But everything we need is in
Yes, it
within the LMO.
would all be adopted code and policy from council, and we would implement it. Everything's implemented in a similar fashion, like short-term rental ordinance or the building code. Those are different tools that we have to approve to ensure public safety and provisions. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we'll look at it. We'll look at, because I know that even the term LMO sometimes has a stigma that we're not comfortable with. But now's the time to do it. Let's take a bigger look at it. I'm hopeful this is one of our last efforts at looking and making sort of these incremental spot changes to the code, and that we can get to that bigger picture here and before too long.
Okay, go ahead.
So I've modified the presentation. Again, I've taken a couple of creative liberties on this, but as the director of this department and as the LMO official. I'm responsible at the staff level for final decisions. My decisions can be appealed, but the buck stops with me with the LMO from a staff level. So I need some help, and that's one of the main purposes of these amendments. I'm asking the committee to greenlight Tier 1A. We have worked with a code writer, same code writer that we had help with to do the short-term rental ordinance and the e-bikes ordinance. And so you can kind of see why we're at the point now with the LMO edits. We needed to get through those efforts that were a priority. But we have drafted the Tier 1A amendments for consideration and are ready to start moving those through the public process. So that would be scheduled through the LMO committee, the planning commission, and then come back to your committee. Again, this is a little different process, but I'm happy to introduce these to this committee first before moving through that process. And then the Tier 1B, we would like to begin evaluation and drafting of those, and then come forward to get the green light to move those through the LMO and Planning Commission. Again, there's some tools in both 1A and 1B that I think would help our staff and development review program be more effective in implementation and enforcement of the LMO. I do want to remind council that this is in pursuit of a strategic action plan item of the SWOT analysis. We maintain a list of potential LMO amendments that surface from many different points of input. Some come from council, some come from staff, some come from boards and committees, some come from the general public, and we keep a list. Some come from other staff and the town manager. But we have a pretty exhaustive list. I'm not going to say it has everything that would need to be addressed. And probably the length of the list provides ammunition or support that we need to look at the code in general rather than 72 different changes to make to the code. This is sort of the first step of the SWOT analysis. I want to do a much deeper dive as we get into having information on conditions and trends. We have some recommendations to the Mid-Island District that might be repeated in other study and redevelopment areas. But want to get these in place so we can have the access to the tools that we're outlining here as we continue that longer and bigger picture effort. So again, we've used a code writer. We have developed code changes, text changes to the LMO based on comments that we've received so far. We do keep an ongoing list, and you've seen that in your packet. And then we have helped, say, draft or prioritize based on what we believe are assessment of need, and that's what we're recommending go forward. So again, they're prioritized in 3 tiers. I've asked to split Tier 1 into an A and a B because we have drafted amendments that have been drafted and are ready for review, and those that need to be drafted and then come forward at a later time. Tiers 2 and 3 are important. I'm not discounting them, but they're really included for information. I wanted to give the committee the full list of potential LMO amendments to have for review, but I'm not asking or not prepared to get in too much detail on Tiers 2 and 3 at this meeting. I'd like to focus on 1A and 1B and be very, very strategic and focused with this committee and as we move forward with the review process. I've got Nicole Dixon here. I'm going to continue to walk through some of these, but I do have Nicole Dixon here who can help with some details. Tier 1A, a recommendation is to remove all staff waivers that currently exist in the LMO. With that provision, we have a Board of Zoning Appeals that can hear requests for variances to performance standards that are part of the LMO, codified LMO. And so we have a recommendation to remove those staff waivers. Again, I need help. I think we have a very talented Board of Zoning Appeals. We have a wealth of volunteers, and that board should be adjudicating modulations to anything in the code that isn't part of the current policy, and not staff making that determination. We've heard about screening of outdoor bikes.
Before you jump
Yes, sir.
into, the why of removing staff waivers, I think I'm right in saying that there have been some decisions that have been criticized, and that it's in response to that in part, but also a general staff attitude that we're dealing with something that we shouldn't be.
Yeah, well, you're right on both fronts, and I don't want a decision on a staff waiver to change based on the staff that's making the decision. The way really good codes work is if you have you should use your Board of Zoning Appeals to make these determinations, and if you have several variances come forward for the same request, and it's sort of a repeated or a high volume, then you should look at your code to say, is the code right? We shouldn't have to continue to ask for variances if we're getting a high volume. So that's how you manage and monitor and revise your code. We're eliminating the ability, or we're eliminating the subjectivity that can exist when we're making the staff level decisions on waivers. Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Well, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so since the rewrite of the comprehensive plan, Sean, has the criteria that the BZA uses to get to their determination been adjusted at all?
So the variance criteria is the same.
It's the same per state code.
Per state code?
Yep.
Oh, I was just going to add that I've heard repeated comments in addition to the why, David, with regard to waivers, as there is a strong belief that they were actually illegal.
Well, that would be a compelling reason as well.
Wouldn't it be?
As well, but yes.
And Glenn, chime in anytime you have a comment, but I'm going to move ahead if you don't.
I'm ready, all right. The second element, allow variances from all sections other than use and density. There's a list of items that are allowed by variance. We need to make sure that we're allowing an applicant to seek relief to the Board of Zoning Appeals from a performance standard, and that's just kind of cleaning that process up. So again, not staff waivers, everything would go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for variance requests. And again, that's a housekeeping and a due process item that needs to be modified.
And so any variance request that otherwise would have been a waiver previously, if it increases use, increases density, and would be disallowed. And I assuming that use and density, I'm just going to ask to make sure, includes increase in height or expansion of or reduction of setbacks and buffers.
So you can't get a variance for use and density, but those are defined uses within a certain zoning district or the density that's applied. The other item is like height, setbacks, those are performance standards of the site. Those can be, an applicant can request a variance from those provisions.
But within the zoning, allowed zoning,
Yes.
no more than what the zoning allows.
Correct,
And then reduction in setbacks and buffers.
correct.
I just want to make sure. If I'm building a single-family house and the zone says 45 feet, and my architect says, well, it's going to be 46 feet, can I get a variance on that foot or not?
Yes.
Request the variance, if you meet the criteria, then it's up to the Board of Zoning Appeals to decide.
And how would we remove something like that from being able, that's clearly a question and an issue.
Sure, and again, I think the deeper SWOT analysis, if we want to have absolute maximums, there's no waiver. Again, right now, there's a waiver that staff could grant that we would prefer the BZA to move forward. If there's a discussion about having absolute maximums and there's no modulation above a certain performance standard, then that's something we can take a look at. So if you want 45 feet to mean 45 feet, there's no opportunity, for increase beyond that number, then that's something we can certainly talk about.
And so where does that come in if we're moving these forward now? Where does that come into play? If that was something that the council saw as beneficial to the island, where does that come into play? Do we take this, how does that work?
Well, I would suggest that if any member of the Public Planning Committee feels strongly in a negative way, then we should vote on that particular item.
Okay. Yeah, we'll take notes on that. You could also exclude height from that ability to go forward from the variance. So there are ways to do it. Thank you. And again, any comments that you have as we move things through the review and public process before it comes back to you, I think that would be great to have so that we can make sure that everyone has access to all of that.
Well, my strong suggestion to our members here is that we make height in particular, since it's been an issue across the island, but probably other areas that we need to think about more carefully, be excluded from this.
All right, thank you. We'll make that note. Any comments other comments on that one?
Not at this time, no.
The next one is to allow outdoor screening for bike storage in a couple of zoning districts. They're the only two zoning districts where bike sale and rentals is allowed. That doesn't allow outdoor storage, but it allows outdoor storage with screening for other uses. And so the why here is that we've got an imbalance between commercial operations that have outdoor storage, whether they're bikes or not bikes. And then we also have an imbalance between operators of bike sales and rental shops that are in different zoning districts doing the same thing, but they have different standards. It doesn't mean that long-term, as we look at the big picture, that we don't treat certain areas differently, but I think right now we're trying to resolve that imbalance between light commercial uses and outdoor storage, and then the imbalance between the different bike shop owners.
I know that we've received a letter from the BZA encouraging us to fast track this issue. Is that permitted, Josh?
Mr. Chairman, current town code, specifically section 16-2-103, outlines the formal procedure mechanisms by which town council must go about considering changes to the LMO. And it clearly states that the Planning Commission must hold a hearing. It must notice that hearing. Part of the Planning Commission's efforts, they've also created a subcommittee where they will initially review requests for LMO changes. But they have to go through that process before bringing a formal recommendation to town council that you will then consider as the policymakers. So that the process itself is spelled out within the town's current code.
No workaround on that.
Not without changing the code itself.
Patsy, you're chairman of the BZA. Would you like to make a comment in this regard, because it was over your signature that we received that letter?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Patsy Bryson. Today, my hat is as chair of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Our concern was not to fast track that required process, but because there is a list of priorities, and in fact, we didn't see this list of priorities at our meeting last Monday. We heard that there was going to be a list of priorities presented to this committee, but what we were asking is, because our request regarding this particular topic had been made 2.5 years ago, and then we had 2 hearings, one last Monday and the other one the previous month, where the same issue had come up. And so we thought that perhaps it should go directly to the LMO committee of the Planning Commission, then to go to the Planning Commission for its hearing, then through this committee to the town council, that process. We just didn't want it to get delayed any further, hence the reason for the letter. And it's the board directing me to send the letter.
Yeah, I understand, I understand. So does that add anything to the equation? Okay.
Again, with the green light from this committee on Tier 1A, we will move as quickly as we can to the LMO committee to have them evaluate and make recommendations to the Planning Commission and move it forward.
Glenn, any comments? Glenn is still with us. Okay, go ahead.
The next bullet relates to manufacturing use and what we've seen with micro or nano breweries. The current code, the way it's written, it's very hard to distinguish manufacturing use for these smaller boutique establishments. And so we are trying to make sure that we're flexible in our code to accommodate those types of uses, and they don't get disqualified by the overriding larger manufacturing connotation that's associated with it. And so that's the goal there.
And I have a question, I guess in a reservation on this one, and it's not necessary, and I remember those discussions as they came through with the previously and hearing all of that. My concern is just, and as this says, relates to the size and the appropriateness of the locations as perhaps they might grow in size. So maybe our greater land use programming coming will help make sense of this, but I do worry about location, size, aesthetics, and all of that. As we are currently situated, perhaps this makes sense, but maybe after we have a better idea of the appropriate district or location or zone or whatever the case may be.
Sure, and certainly understood. And again, I want to be completely upfront on this longer, bigger view. I think we'll resolve a lot of these things, but there are some changes that would provide some help in the center.
It provides help, sure, in getting things passed and people to run businesses, and I'm all for people being able to open their businesses. But if we put the cart before the horse, we are establishing something that we know in the later event we may very well not have wanted to do or have done differently. So a little bit of a an issue for me on this one.
Okay.
I would like to add that this was also a request that came from the BZA due to an appeal.
I remember, yeah. I appreciate that, and I understand historically a lot of these, but I still have my comments. Okay.
Sean, if we are to move this forward and it actually becomes a part of the existing LMO, and by actuality, it's connected to a piece of ground, and then we rewrite the LMO, and we realize that that piece of ground that this ordinance, today's LMO, is approving, but we determine at that time that it's inappropriate, does that create a problem for us?
Well, it would create a legal non-conforming condition. Again, I think what we wanted.
If
Yeah,
the
yes,
site hadn't been developed for that use. I guess I'm just following up on Tammy's concern. I don't happen to share it, but I expect one to get a better understanding of what our options are.
Yeah, again, this primary purpose is to clarify basically the use table for this particular type of use. Again, it went to the BZA for a hearing. That we didn't have breweries were all classified a certain way as manufacturing, but the operator, it was a much smaller operation, similar to a bar. So it's really looking at that clarification. Yeah, I think we need to look at all of this, again, in the big picture. And again, as we go through this process, that's kind of the lens that we will use with LMO and planning and back to this committee before it goes to council.
Okay.
Any other comments on that one? Are we good? Well, I hope the next one's a little more straightforward. It's one of Darren's suggestions, one of his last suggestions before his retirement. We take annual traffic counts. They're based on the 45th busiest day of the year. It's typically been a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday timeframe in June. Looking at the traffic data that shifted to July traffic count. So that's just kind of meeting our own performance standard for when we should do these counts. Change when plantings are required on a single-family lot, and buffers are part of subdivision and certificate of compliance. Nicole, you want to jump in on this one?
This amendment would provide provisions for a temporary certificate of compliance to change when plantings are required on single-family lots in buffers as part of a subdivision certificate of compliance process. The amendment would allow a performance guarantee for a specific period of time where landscaping and tree planting is deferred due to inappropriate weather conditions for planting, or the likelihood that the trees will be damaged during additional construction activities related to that subdivision. So we've heard complaints for years from developers that they're required to install their landscaping as part of their certificate of compliance, and then when they go to develop the lots, they're having to destroy the trees to be able to build the home and driveway and those sorts of things. So
Nicole, just so that I'm clear, I have 10 acres of ground and I'm going to subdivide it into single-family lots. Is that the situation that you're talking about?
yes, sir.
Okay. And I get my development permit so I can put in rosewater, sewer, and drainage. Does our code today say that I have to start planting things at that point?
Yes, all infrastructure and everything on the approved plan has to be installed and inspected before we would stamp the plat for recording purposes and have them build the homes.
Okay. I think that's unrealistic, so I'm in support of the change. Although I think we have a larger problem with what those subdivisions look like.
Sure.
So.
Is there a time frame? I understand there's the surety bond and all of that you were talking about. Is there a time frame within which the completion that they would have to be planted in compliance?
That will be incorporated into the requirements.
Any idea what that time frame would be,
I think we were talking maybe 12 to 18 months.
After completion of all the homes?
No, after approval of the subdivision.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, we wouldn't CO the permit for the home until the landscaping was installed.
Okay, so that's a separate process.
Yes.
Yeah, so as each individual lot was CO'd and then sold, they would need to have the landscaping in for that particular unit. But by then, they've got the structure and the driveway in, we're not tearing it up and running over landscape.
Thank you. Move on.
The next one is amend the definition of a dwelling unit. This is something that we've struggled with for some time in determining what constitutes a dwelling unit. What we've seen a lot of times is there's five required elements for a dwelling unit, and what we've seen is the installation or removal of a stove. And so if it doesn't have a stove as a permanent cooking facility, then it's not a dwelling unit. And so we've looked at some other examples, and our code writer looked at some other examples that are more appropriate. What you see is a lot of times they'll rough in provisions for electrical and plumbing to provide the accommodations. Inspections done, it doesn't necessarily meet the definition of dwelling unit, and then quickly there's a hole cut in the drywall, and the plug for the stove pops in, and so we're trying to be more proactive and giving us a better definition to help us enforce the dwelling unit issue that we have been dealing with for a while.
Any comments?
And nothing, and so amend the dwelling, so at this stage, we're just authorizing for y'all to develop that, which you'll go through the process and then come back.
Yes, ma'am. While we have a draft of the language. We're not ready to say, please move on to council. We need to go back through the appropriate public process with LMO and Planning Commission, and you'll get to see it again and decide if it actually advances. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Amend the definition of changeable copy. There's new technology that allows an operator of a business, and let's use fuel centers for an example. Right now, the way the code reads, and a lot of codes read, require manual changing of the pricing. So you have to go out, and if they're not in our community, but in other communities, they have these big poles that have little suction things, they pull them off and put it. But here, you have to go out and you have to pull off the 9 or maybe the 3 and make it to a 4. Hopefully, we're going back down to the 3. But they have to manually change those signs. There is technology now that allows allows an operator to change them electronically from inside the establishment, but they're not LED. They're not in violation of what I would say is the sort of core value and expectation with signs. They're analog and on a wheel. They don't change often, but when you change a pricing, you type it in inside and you hit it. With a lot of staffing shortages, there's not a lot of staff where they can actually go out and change them and shut down the shop. So this is just to provide another mechanism for operators that want to take advantage of this new technology. To be able to change the copy for that business.
But there's no impact on the way our residents or tourists see that sign?
No, and as we move forward, we'll have some visuals, we'll show some examples. But in the research that we've done, it's an analog and you can't necessarily
But we're not
tell.
changing aesthetic guidelines in this recommendation?
No, sir.
Thank you. Okay.
The next one, amend the measurement for height calculation, and I want to put everyone at ease. When we adopted the flood control ordinance early last year, we missed a change in the LMO that relates to height. So we went from a base flood elevation requirement of 14 plus an additional foot, and with the change in datum that the new maps were based on, and the new maps that came out, our base floods went significantly lower. We worked to adopt a flood control ordinance to protect the community and minimize the difference between the two maps if you had adjacent properties that were developed. So we maintained protection for single-family homes at a 13-foot level, which is really 14 based on the new datum, and for commercial to 11, which is 12 under the old system. But the way the code was previously written was if you had a site higher than the base flood, then it's measured from that height, and we don't want people digging down, right, because they don't want to lose the additional height that they're entitled to. So if you had an elevation of 20, you're blessed on Hilton had to have an elevation of 20 or higher. The measurement of height wouldn't start at 11 feet or 13 feet. It should start at the grade of that ground. So it's not a change in how much you can build above, but we were sort of penalizing folks that had higher ground, which is not anyway, it's cleaning up that main discrepancy when we changed our flood control ordinance.
Go ahead.
So just help me understand
Yes,
that. So if you have an elevation, not 20, but 8, and you have to get to the minimum flood level, then you're given an additional height overall of 7 feet, 6 feet. We're at 14 now rather than the 15.
Are we, is it single family?
Yeah.
So if you're at elevation, right now, a base flood of 8, for single family, you have to get to 11. And when you start measuring height, you start measuring at that base flood elevation. And so it'd be 35 feet or 45 feet from there.
That gets added on. And so then if it's 20 feet, if your starting ground is, to use your example, at 20, are we saying that in order to give people that additional space, we're not adding on? So just help me understand it, because want to ensure that we are not raising 1 inch above where our zoning currently allows.
And that's not the case. So if you were at a base flood elevation of 8, but you're required by code to have a minimum first finished floor of 11 feet, that 3 feet doesn't count against your height. The height starts at the finished floor. If you're above 11, if you're at 20 feet and you're allowed to build 35 feet, 35-foot home, from grade, not 11 feet, but from grade at 20 feet, you can build 35 feet above. This isn't increasing height, it's just saying we're not penalizing folks that have an elevation above 11 or 13 by saying you're losing part of your height because of where you land in the elevation.
Okay.
Go ahead. I'm presuming you have nothing. Okay.
Did you get that? It was confusing to me. Just to make sure everybody's clear on it, because I know that
I'm happy to.
Because height is always a controversial topic, and I just want to make sure we're clear on it.
That's good.
The next one, add owner's consent required for minor subdivisions. Right now, owner's consent should be allowed for all applications, but right now it's listed as an exemption for minor subdivisions. And this just comes back and says you have to have owner's consent for minor subdivision application.
Why didn't we require that at the outset?
It's a very good question. I haven't.
All right.
I don't know. It's just, we've looked at it.
Language from the previous LMO just got transferred into the 2014, and it references in the application requirement section in Appendix D for minor subdivisions, it says everything that's required in the major subdivision list is required with the exception of owner's consent, open space, and I think that was just an error.
I was gonna say, because there's a new sheriff in town, and we caught it, but, so anyway, it's just cleaning that up, as it should be there. And then the last one in Tier 1A, provide standards for deviations from previously platted subdivisions. So we had a legal a determination that previously platted subdivisions, like if you were modifying your open space or your roadway, that you needed to have consent from the individual owners of the subdivision. What we're trying to articulate here, and we probably haven't done it the best way, is to say if you've got a previously platted subdivision, we are going to be very sensitive in modulations with shifting of a line here and there to try to increase density within those platted subdivisions. And so we don't want folks selling small portions of their property, and so someone can aggregate and overall they're adding a development potential into that subdivision where they could do 1 unit on that property and now they can kind of do 2 because they've squeezed some square footage from their adjacent lots.
Okay, I think I know what you're driving at, but if the 3 of us move into a subdivision and the developer still has control, and that developer wants to adjust open space line, whatever, do the 3 of us get to say no under this language or not?
Well, if the platted subdivision had been approved, yes, sir. Now, if it was done as a phasing plan, I would say that there's differences if it's a phasing plan.
I got that. Yeah, okay. All right. Questions on that? Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. I noted that Ms. Becker had questions on the height issue and on the variance, our manufacturing. Are those noted in? Okay.
Yes, sir.
I don't think Glenn is still with us. Is he? Glenn, you there?
Raised my hand and I haven't gotten recognized.
All right.
Am I on the line there?
You are. Speak up. What do you got?
Thank you. First of all, I want to say that Sean started off talking about making these piecemeal corrections in anticipation of maybe a total rewrite coming down the road. I thought about that, and I think it probably makes the most sense, although it's going to take a long time for all of that to be accomplished. But he also started off with comments that a lot of this is looking forward to developing a future land use map and trying to decide about controls on development moving forward into the future. It's my understanding that that beginning effort is scheduled to occur in the last quarter of this year, and I look forward to our participating in that to try to get some sort of controls on the growth of the island. With reference to the Tier 1A matters, I think Sean has given a good and clear clarification. I know that a number of these have been in existence for a long time, starting off with staff waivers. When I was serving on the BZA years ago, that was an issue and it caused the BZA a lot of problems. And so it's about time that this is being corrected, and we can blame that on the new sheriff being in town or whatever. But I am comfortable with moving these matters forward in Tier 1A to the Planning Commission LMO committee. Thank you, David.
Will you make that as a motion? I'm
Yes, sir. I move that the Public Planning Committee move the Tier 1A amendments to the LMO forward to the Planning Commission LMO committee for adoption or recommendation, rather, to the Planning Commission, and then eventually back to this committee and on to Town Council.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second it, but I also have a question.
And if you second it?
Yes, I second.
Okay, then we'll have discussion and public comments. Go ahead. So we have a motion and a second.
Thank you. And a sore throat. Actually, not a sore throat, just hoarse, not sick. I have a request, and I'm not sure how best to make it, but since we're moving Tier 1 forward, there's enough, and maybe Nicole, you can speak to this. Sean, you may have heard of this as well. We have on the permit, if I'm correct, an area where the applicant checks off that there are no covenants or anything like that that exists. And it is a matter of faith that it's been checked off. And with that, there's nothing that prevents the person from doing from an ARB or a community standards perspective that prevents this person from making that application. And I don't know if it's changed, but I don't think we require that the approval from the ARB, from the neighborhood standards be submitted at the same time. And I think it's smart, perhaps, that we consider doing that, that if someone comes in and their neighborhood has reviewed the plan previously, said, yes, it meets our covenants, et cetera, that they just include that document to make the ease of y'all's job a little bit more free-flowing and less controversial should someone may have forgotten to first go through their ARB. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Is there a way to move that forward with this first tier?
Well, is that a policy change or is that an LMO amendment?
It would be a change in the requirements for the application. And what I would say is, let us, well, with all due respect, please, if we can move the Tier 1 forward, we'll add this to Tier 1B to try to evaluate it quicker and see if and what is appropriate to advance back through the committee.
That was a good question, David. So just so I can understand, is it an LMO change or is it just a policy change?
Well, I
on
think
the
we need to.
application?
I think we need to figure out if it's just done at the operational level.
Okay.
Certainly, all of our application requirements are part of the forms that folks fill out, but it depends on some of the legality of. Are we doing title research? Are we what the requirements are? So let me look at that in a little bit more.
I support the direction.
Yeah.
Okay. Alex, anything you want to add?
So, yeah, thank you. Sean, just a very direct question. Tier A, you mentioned, your take on the current LMO, that you can go back historically and see items that may have been changed politically or otherwise. Tier A, are any of these political, in your opinion?
I have a harder time with these amendments, seeing where it was a unique situation that we tried to accommodate through the code. So no, I don't think these are, I think these are items that have popped up a few times that need attention. So no, I don't believe that these are politically driven.
Okay, and at the moment, there's a process before it gets back to us that includes LMO seeing it, committee seeing it, planning commission seeing it, and then this committee, which will involve a lot of public notification and comment, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the tools that the planning commission is using currently are what when it comes to LMO amendments? Can we briefly describe those for me, please?
Can you explain your question again?
Well, the planning commission is going to say yes or no to what's being asked by staff, and they're going to use something to make that determination. What is that something? Just a brief understanding of the tool that the planning commission would use.
Yeah, I think they look at the recommendation of the LMO committee. It's, the language is typically vetted through that, and sometimes we have to go back to the LMO committee to refine that language. And then it's brought to the planning commission for public hearing. They take public input. They take the recommendation of the LMO committee. There's no set of criteria, if that's what you're asking, that they review.
Well, we'll make, maybe this is more what we're looking for. We'll make sure that there's a clear communication plan, that these are coming forward. These will be staff recommendations with the help of our code writer on changes that go to LMO committee. We'll rely on their expertise as the committee that needs to recommend it to the planning commission. Encourage public input into the process, and then bring the entire process is public hearings, and just as a reminder, when everything up to the point where it comes back to this committee is a recommendation, and then you'll make a final recommendation to council on policy action.
So have things changed since I sat on the planning commission, where we were using the comprehensive plan as our guide to make decisions? Is that still the criteria?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. Okay.
Thank you for the coaching. Yes, sir.
And timing, if we were to say yes to this today, pushing it through LMO committee, planning commission, and then back to us, what's best case scenario as far as timing is concerned?
Probably 2 or 3 months to get back to this committee.
Okay.
And again, I'm going to caveat that by how much the input that we get along the way. I don't want to get stuck in the spin cycle on too many of these, and I'm hopeful that we won't, but we'll let the public process dictate the length, but I would say 2 to 3 months back to this committee.
Okay. I just want to say, Mr. Chair, that we sit in a very unique spot in this committee, because before these amendments reach full council, we will see them first. So I'm pleased to hear from staff that at the moment, none of these are political. They're coming from situations that continue to arise here in our community and need some attention. And I appreciate that the BZA has chimed in. They're in a situation where they're seeing more than we see at the council level. And as you start to get into Tier B and the laundry list of the others, it just screams to me that we're broken and we need to get fixed. And I just suggest to us at the policy level that we don't make this political, that we listen to what staff is saying, let them move through in the next couple of months to get these done, and then let's work on the bigger picture in terms of our new tools, so to speak. I think that's important because when this gets back to us in 2 to 3 months, we could then, I'm sorry to say this out loud, but we could jack it up by arguing amongst ourselves as to which items are political or not. So I just offer, I'm ready to move forward with this. I think staff has presented a good path forward. We need to support not just tier A here, but also the idea of us looking at a deeper dive as to where we're going with our land use on Hilton Head. So I'll be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your presentation, your answers. I'd like to invite public comment at this time. Chet, thank you for being patient.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I'm Chester Williams. With respect to these amendments, the devil's always in the details, so I mean, I'd very much like to see what the text of the proposed amendments are, because occasionally the language doesn't say what people seem to think it says. So I think that requires a good bit of vetting. But particular items, the outdoor screen storage for bicycles in the light commercial and community commercial zones, I think it's a bad idea to change that. And my office is in a light commercial zoning district. I think 2 doors down from me, there is a bicycle shop that has outdoor storage that's not permitted. Several other lots down, there is a bicycle shop, a new one, the Wheels, at the corner of Executive Park Road and Pope Avenue. All of their storage is indoor. So it can be done in that zoning district. And I think when you think about it, the reason why you can't have outdoor storage there is because it keeps the business smaller. It fits the character of the neighborhood, of the zoning district. When you allow outdoor storage of bicycles, even if it's screened, you're going to have a much bigger operation, a much bigger footprint, a much bigger impact on the neighborhood. And I can't attest to it exactly, but I think that's part of the reasoning why outdoor storage is not permitted in those zoning districts. The other thing I'd caution you about is the definition of a dwelling unit. I would urge you not to set up a scenario where you have one definition of a dwelling unit under the building code and a different definition of a dwelling unit under the land management ordinance. But I am very curious to see the exact language that's proposed for these amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chet. Appreciate it. Again, thank you for your patience. Are there any other public comments with regards to this matter? Yes, Patsy, please.
Again, Patsy Bryson is Chair of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Just to quickly point out, again, our concern is that the request was made 2.5 years ago about outdoor storage. We're not taking a position on the merits. I can't take a position on the merits. But just to urge the process on the, if you will, the staff level, moving things forward, the LMO committee meeting. I've just looked at the calendar for August. I see a planning commission meeting on August 17. I hope that the staff will schedule something on that agenda to consider these amendments, especially the ones we requested 2.5 years ago. And we also sent a letter in June of 2020 asking for a study about the waiver situation. So on behalf of the BZA, we've made these requests for at least 2 years, and we appreciate you moving them forward today. And I speak not for myself, but Dr. Anna Piner is our vice chair. David Fingerhut, who's previous chair, is back on the BZA. Peter Christian back on the BZA, Bob Johnson, Charlie Walzak, and our new member, Kay Bayless. So it's not just Patsy speaking today. It's on behalf of our full board. Thank you.
Thank you, Patsy. Appreciate that. Mr. Babel.
With due respect to my esteemed colleague Chet, I must disagree. We have 34 places that rent bikes on this island. It's an extremely competitive business. It has this, I think the land management ordinance regarding bikes was written in 2014 when it was a nice little cottage industry. Well, biking has just exploded in this island, as you well know. And it's very important we maintain a very competitive biking infrastructure of sales and service organizations. It's part of who we are. And with this LMO, with some of these places, it puts them out of business with these requirements. And by doing so, what we do is we remove some of the competitive factor that's keeping prices low, frankly, because it is so competitive and getting bikes delivered to people who can get them at a very good price. And that's one of the reasons it's so popular here and so many people use it, because it is so competitive. It's an incredible business model, and it really works. And staff has been charged with coming up with some screening that I think will be appropriate. At Patsy's thing, I mean, this took 2 hours of discussion, and it was 6-0 that we should go forward with this. So I would recommend that you disregard what Jet has said, frankly, and let's move forward and get this thing moving. We've been kicking this can down the road. Let's just move forward and get it done, and let's keep this thing going the way it should be, and it'll be just fine.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you very much.
Any other public comments?
Sitting.
All right, Trista, please call the roll.
Mr. Brown?
I'm processing.
Distracted by Mr. Stanford. I support the motion.
Mrs. Becker?
I support the motion, and everyone should know I listen to everyone equally and fairly.
Mr. Stanford?
Approve the motion.
And Mr. Ames?
Yes, for the motion.
Motion carries, sir.
Thank you very much. There are no other items on the agenda for new business. There is no old business at this time. We'll adjourn. And we all Cinderella.